As strange as it may seem, our story will begin with the main ball for aristocrats. The best musicians from all over the empire were specially invited to this event. That is why no one tried to miss such an event that happened once in a lifetime. In high society, people's behavior, especially that of young ladies, was closely monitored. So our heroine, who was reborn more than once, attracted attention. People could not help but condemn the lady who behaved so provocatively at an important banquet. This girl's name was Roberta Bernadette, and her whole life had long since become clear to our heroine, all because she was living her 20th time and still could not avoid a cruel death. The girl's young age was deceptive, because inside she was much older due to the transformations. So Ruby had long since gotten used to the fact that she found herself in someone else's love affair. Bernadette was not at all saddened by the fact that her role was to be that of a villain. Instead, the heroine had a blast at events like this one. In her past life, the girl read the whole story, but she didn't know that she would end up in it. Then the lady sympathized with Roberta and ended up in her body a few days later. The heroine's entire consciousness was filled with horror, because this character was not expecting a good ending to the story. At first, the lady had a hard time coming to her senses, so she dropped out of life a lot. But as soon as the girl took her first steps in high society, troubles fell upon her. Roberta was blamed for all sorts of incidents to which she had nothing to do. At first, Bernadette had no idea that she would witness the death of other people. But at the moment when people died before her eyes for the first time, the lady's life was divided into before and after. Of course, the heroine was not to blame for the terrible torments that the aristocrats were subjected to. But who would have believed the girl who always brought only misfortune and chaos into the lives of others? This is how Roberta's first life ended. She had not yet had time to get used to the circumstances. Then the lady really dreamed of dying, since everyone around her was against her. The Grand Duke read out the indictment in cold blood, even though no investigation had been conducted. At that moment, Roberta no longer cared about all the accusations that were being brought against her. Of all the people, only one girl was against the death of the lady she considered a close friend. Her name was Leona Almaz, and for a long time, only her kindness was a ray of light for Bernadette. However, no one cared anymore that some aristocrat was publicly executed. Throughout all her reincarnations, Ruby faced death by unfair accident. Moreover, each time the circumstances were such that the heroine could not predict her death. Moreover, the horrors around her became more and more terrible, as they affected other people as well. Even when the girl locked herself in a room for many years, her guilt was somehow miraculously proven. This is how Roberta, time after time, encountered injustice that she could not overcome. So Bernadette has long been tired of behaving decently in society, which will again condemn her. No matter how shameless the aristocrats called her, the lady did not pay attention to them. Ruby was afraid of wasting her precious time on something that could interfere with her plans for fun, and only one person at that moment dared to approach the girl who was causing the chaos. No matter how hard Bernadette tried, this lady constantly followed her around. But as a child, the heroine was a terrible person, because a real villain still lived then. But it seemed that Leona didn't care how much pain her close friend caused her. Throughout Roberta's lives, this girl continued to stand by her side. But no matter how desperately Almaz screamed, her words meant nothing to the enraged aristocrats. So even with such support, the heroine died again and again, experiencing short-term pain. And only Leona cried sincerely every time, because of the death of her friend, who was angry with her. The girl didn't care about people's opinions, because she followed her moral principles. And in this life, Almaz did not change at all, and still reminded about Ruby's rules. But Bernadette wasn't interested in the nuances that prevented her from having a good time. Now nothing could spoil the heroine's mood, because her death was not yet imminent. Although Leona tried to help her friend again, Roberta herself only wanted privacy and peace. In fact, the girl was sad about how much trouble she was causing Almaz. But this lady was so stubborn that Ruby couldn't get her to leave. This time, the heroine acted more rudely, because according to the story, an important event was about to happen. As Leona walked out of the hall doors, she ran into her future partner, as the story goes. This man was the Grand Duke of Geralk, Cygnus, who was distinguished by his coldness in character and look. It was more beneficial for the heroine than anyone else for this couple to be together again in the future. While music was playing all around, people were madly giving themselves over to dancing, which delighted their consciousness. Anyone who was drawn into this cycle was inevitably drawn into it. But this trick didn't work with Roberta, because people were afraid to get close to her. It was all because the aroma of alcohol was so strong coming from the girl that it was disgusting. That evening, the heroine really did overdo it with drinks, because she wanted to forget about everything. And this chance led her to meet a man who was supposed to talk to another lady. Due to her clouded mind, Roberta did not even understand what kind of aristocrat had noticed her. Now Bernadette was so happy with the alcohol and the guy's company that she didn't think about his identity. As a result, it was only a few hours later that the girl woke up, finding herself in someone else's estate. The Duke could not leave the lady alone in the middle of the street, so he brought her to his home. Despite his cold appearance, he treated the unknown aristocrat with warmth and care. But as gratitude, he received only the piercing screams of Ribi, who was scared to death. During this time, the alcohol had almost completely cleared from the blood of the lady who had drunk too much, so she was able to realize that she was with a strange guy and in an unfamiliar place. No matter how handsome this young man was, now he only caused fear and panic in the heroine. In her past lives, Roberta had not been able to see his face well, so she did not recognize the Duke. So Geralc appeared to her as a formidable guy, with an unknown identity, with an unclear purpose. The girl felt vulnerable in a situation of which she did not remember the beginning and did not understand the end. She struggled to recall what had happened after she had become intoxicated. Then, Cygnus showed a lot of delicacy to the lady, who had clearly been drunk for a long time. But the heroine herself believed that all her mental cloudings were only temporary. Meanwhile, the aristocrat could barely stand on her own feet because she had overindulged in drinks. It was no surprise that the whole situation for Roberta began to spin, as if the apocalypse had begun. Panic consumed Bernadette's entire consciousness, and she began to dream only of running away as quickly as possible. Only in the man next to her did she see salvation, and so she turned to him for help. At that time, Geralc couldn't understand why this lady was so sure of her painful death, but he was used to not asking unnecessary questions if someone genuinely needed help. The guy was gallant to the lady who acted as if she was about to die. He paid no attention to the people who were closely watching them leave the room, while it immediately became clear to the aristocrats what kind of man had carried Roberta out of the hall. All these memories, like a snowball, came crashing down on the heroine, who was not prepared for this. Although Bernadette always behaved provocatively, she tried not to lead to such consequences. And now in front of her stood a guy who could very well demand compensation for his behavior. The girl still had no order in her head, so the memories continued to appear. So, she remembered how together they went outside the palace, where there was only fresh air. It was at that moment that the heroine began to undress because of the heat, as she felt ill. Geralc tried his best to hand this strange lady over to the care of her servants, but Ribi refused to give her name, because she was going to die soon. There was a lot of truth in the girl's words, but not for a person who didn't know about her reincarnations. Even the aristocrat's name meant nothing to him, since the Duke was encountering this lady for the first time in his life. He had no intention of taking responsibility for a girl he had just met, so the guy went to look for at least one person who was a servant of her family. While the heroine was immersed in terrible thoughts, under the influence of alcoholic drinks, she didn't care that she was once again left alone in an unfamiliar place of high society. Roberta was only worried that she might soon die cruelly again. The heroine's heated words reached the ears of Geralc, who was standing nearby. But the lady was shouting that she would definitely survive this time, no matter what she had to do. The guy no longer knew to what extent the lady's screams related to the delirium of a man drunk to the point of insanity. He remained a gentleman to the last, so he offered his help to the girl. Even at that moment, Bernadette barely understood how important the man standing before her was. All her thoughts were filled with the fact that she was caught up in the plot of a cursed novel with other heroes. And it so happened that this handsome guy was to the lady's taste, although before she would not have looked at him. But now Roberta's entire consciousness was filled with thoughts of the elegant man in front of her. So the girl reached out for a hot kiss, because for her there were no boundaries. Surprisingly, the Duke could not refuse the warmth that was offered to him by the young lady. Only after some time did the heroine learn how hard it was for the guy to carry her on his back. In fact, this lady did a good job of brightening up his boring everyday life, so the Duke was not angry with her. But for Bernadette, it was a shock that she was now at the Grand Duke's estate. But she knew well the name of the owner of the house, who had already passed mortal judgment on her more than once. So the lady tried her best to avoid Geralc, who sent her to execution in reincarnations. Roberta's knowledge was so limited that she mistook the Duke for an ordinary subordinate. Now the lady was only concerned with the thought that she did not want to die so quickly and stupidly. It was strange for Cygnus to see how convinced this girl was of her own death. However, on behalf of the Duke, he promised that he would under no circumstances allow her to die in the near future. The shock written on Reeby's face conveyed the thoughts in her head at that moment better than any words. The heroine was sure that this guy must have paid attention to Leona Almaz, and in the end, she came to the conclusion that the two lovers were not even interested in each other. This circumstance knocked the fighting spirit out of the lady, who was ready to seek salvation for herself. That's why she was so surprised when the Duke asked her to tell her more about himself. Bernadette had nothing to share with the guy who was supposed to be someone else's partner. She spent her entire life trying to blend in with other aristocrats so as not to arouse suspicion. That's why Reeby started talking about her friend Leona, who should be in her place now. The heroine dreamed of continuing to remain in the shadow of this bright and kind girl with a happy future. And, in order not to overshadow her, she needed to quickly leave the Grand Duke's company. But the guy was interested in the fact that during the entire time, Roberta had told little about herself. Unconsciously, the heroine acted like the secondary character that she was. Therefore, from the moment she entered this world, the girl was tormented by constant doubts. She wasn't sure if she deserved to stay in such luxury at the Imperial Palace. She didn't know for sure whether she could accept the feelings that Leona so desperately showed towards her. All these worries did not allow the heroine to live peacefully, because this world did not belong to her. This confusion did not leave the Duke indifferent, as he wanted to help this girl. Her eyes gave him no reason to doubt that all this time she had been telling only the truth. From that moment on, Geralc made a serious decision to prove to Miss that she was real. Only someone else's touch is the best way to sober up in situations when you are confused. But he didn't know that the heroine's consciousness was filled with memories of other lives. More than once she had encountered the expression of sadness on the face of a friend whom she could not help. According to the plot, the Duke was on the girl's side all this time, but he only slightly eased her condition. Many believed that Almaz owed her life to Geralc, who was worried about her. Aristocrats always reacted acutely to any situation related to someone's death, so they thoughtlessly blamed Roberta for everything, just for her constant bad behavior. So once again, the heroine found herself guilty of everything she never even intended to do. Until now, the girl had constant nightmares about past lives in which she died. That's why Bernadette always woke up on edge, not immediately understanding what was going on around her. But she remembered all too well everything that had happened last night between her and the Duke. A note of concern appeared on Geralc's cold face when he learned of the lady's condition. Their passionate kisses could bring anyone to their senses, so Roberta forgot about all her problems. Although she was not supposed to get close to Cygnus according to the plot, now Ribby was thinking only about herself. This is how it all led to the fact that a stranger guy and girl spent a hot night together. It was only in the morning that Bernadette realized what she had done because of alcohol, and now only a miracle would help the heroine correct the absurdity that she committed at night. Geralc greeted the girl with a soft smile, but even so, his eyes were full of coldness. This guy's whole appearance could repel anyone, no matter how handsome he was. Roberta feared a repeat of her previous lives, when she died because of false accusations, so she thought with horror that she was still going down the wrong path in the plot. The lady didn't know whether she should get closer to the Duke, who could help her survive this time, so she acted cautiously, although the guy did not show any signs of concern. He even called on the butler Ori, who understood the tastes of aristocrats, for help. But Bernadette still wasn't ready to open her heart to the man who executed her, so she began to reject any proposals, even though they were concerned about her. Roberta has so far said little about herself, so as not to attract unnecessary attention. She felt calmer at home, and yesterday's adventures were an exception to the rule. The heroine described herself as if only positive mental things were important to her, all for the sake of ruining her image in front of the Duke, who became interested in her personality. The girl was good at pretending that she didn't need wealth at all. She wasn't even bothered by the fact that all the assistants were shocked by the aristocrat's story. In her very first life, the lady lived in near poverty, so she remembered caring for animals. She paid attention to everything around her, just so as not to have a serious conversation with the Duke. The guy didn't miss the fact that Roberta had been acting strangely the whole time. Unlike her, all this time, he had not thought about the animals that needed to be protected. But the girl's unusual behavior pleased the Duke, who rarely interacted with people. So the heroine only attracted the attention of this guy even more, although she wanted something else. And in the end, a sincere smile blossomed on Geralt's face, which he was not shy about giving to the lady. The heroine could not understand why the atmosphere between them suddenly became better. Instead of turning away from the lady, Cygnus only became more interested in helping her. The guy scared his assistants the most with his behavior, as he considered them incompetent. Cygnus did everything to ensure that Roberta could not refuse his insidious offer. But the heroine did not initially plan to go to the next ball with the Grand Duke. However, circumstances developed in such a way that she was already saying goodbye to the estate's assistants. The lady didn't even have time to blink before she found herself embroiled in such an unpleasant matter for her. And even the butler Ori could not help her, as he was afraid to inform the master of the refusal. This is how the heroine found herself under the flirtation of a powerful guy who charmed many. She still shuddered as she recalled the events of the previous night, when the Duke kissed her. Then Roberta reciprocated the guy's feelings, but tears still welled up in her eyes. This moment greatly worried Geralt, who tried to do everything so that Miss would not be hurt. All these memories only embarrassed the heroine even more, so she would have preferred to avoid them. But she was haunted by the fact that she finally had the opportunity to save herself in this life. The sudden stop of the carriage temporarily drove all worries about the past from Bernadette's mind. The girl quickly immersed herself in the present, since such incidents had never happened before. She could not ignore what happened on the road, because her life depended on it. It turned out that the assistants were trying to deal with an old woman who had stopped in the middle of the road. The woman was clearly not herself, as she did not even respond to the men's furious shouts. Their rough actions had no effect, as the old woman seemed unable to understand anything. Seeing this situation, the lady again plunged into the past, in which she experienced one of the deaths. Then, no matter how much she screamed, no one wanted to believe in her innocence and the truth. So it became clear to Roberta that as soon as Geralt turned away from her, everything would end in death. Therefore, the lady decided to stay away from any help from the Duke. And first of all, she ran away from her assistant, who sincerely wanted to help the aristocrat. The heroine was disgusted by the very thought that many things could be solved with money and status. Ori wisely did not argue with the girl, although he still did not understand the reason for her anger towards him. The butler had noticed more than once that this lady was extraordinary, and she only confirmed his thoughts. Only Bernadette could take pity on the homeless woman who was blocking the carriage's progress. The old woman immediately noticed that the lady in front of her was very different from the others. Before, Roberta had never thought about the impression she made on the people around her. But as a token of gratitude, this old woman predicted the future of Rebe, who had helped her. What surprised the heroine most was that the stranger knew about her 20th life in this world. But Bernadette was sure that she had never told this fact to anyone. It turned out that the fortune teller was real. Although the lady did not believe such people, she couldn't believe that the old woman was sure that this world would be destroyed if the plot turned. But when Roberta wanted to ask her questions, the old woman disappeared, as if she had never been there. For the first time in her life, the heroine became so scared that she froze to the bone. But at that moment, the girl was brought out of her thoughts by the cry of the maid Claire, who was worried about her. All this time, the assistant tirelessly searched for the lady, who did not return home at night. But Claire didn't expect to receive praise for her search from the usually nasty aristocrat. So, with a red face, she barely managed to squeeze out that Leona had been waiting for her beloved friend all morning. Only with the maid could the heroine consult without arousing suspicion in others. So from her, the lady learned that the destruction of the world means the death of all the characters in the book. This ending did not suit Roberta, because now it was not only about her stupid death, but for now, Bernadette had no idea how to save all the people in this world. It turned out that it wasn't only the assistant who couldn't stand it and went out to meet her beloved mistress, because Leona also left the waiting room for a friend she hadn't seen for a long time. But Alma's forgot to look around, so she didn't see the carriage next to her. It took Roberta a couple of seconds to realize that the inevitable was about to happen. While Leona herself carelessly crossed the road to meet the lady she was constantly chasing after. A cheerful smile shone on the face of the beautiful Almaz until the very end. Even though she could have died now, Bernadette would never have been able to save the girl from such a terrible and stupid death due to carelessness. But everything turned out well, except that people from the outside quickly came running to the noise. It turned out that the horse swerved just before colliding with the inattentive aristocrat. This situation frightened poor Leona so much that she temporarily forgot how to breathe. For several weeks now, bad luck had been constantly haunting Almaz, but this was the most significant. But the heroine had no idea why troubles were happening to her friend this time. Even when the lady simply returned home, she could no longer feel safe. After all, random collapses of buildings, collisions with people, burns and cuts haunted the girl. As a result, within a couple of days, Leona had changed beyond recognition because she couldn't sleep normally. She began to believe more and more that someone had placed a terrible curse on her. Otherwise, how could one explain why incidents happened in Almaz's room? Despite all the concerns from the maids, the mistress still did not stay at home. She didn't want to sit locked up just because she could die at any moment, and on the street. Leona had always been stubborn, so she did not want to meet her death alone. But Roberta couldn't just ignore the fact that her friend had almost died under a carriage. While the aristocrat continued to turn a blind eye to everything, everyone else only became more worried. In fact, the fears inside the girl were so great that she could not remain alone. But even outside the estate, troubles were constantly waiting for the lady, as if they wanted to kill her. In the end, Leona finally believed that she had been cursed by someone, since she had such bad luck. Roberta had no answers to the question of why her friend was constantly on the brink of life and death. However, the heroine could not get the advice of the terrible old woman she met out of her head. She promised that the whole world would collapse if Bernadette did not change her behavior according to the plot. So it turned out that the lady was obliged to push away Geralk, who was kind to her. Therefore, the heroine was faced with the task of doing everything possible to make Leona pay attention to the Duke. She indirectly said that the lady was destined to have a boyfriend, but he was with someone else. The girl did not reveal the details of that situation, because she did not want to be guilty. But Almaz found even the possibility that her partner was with another lady disgusting. So all of Roberta's attempts to win her friend over to her betrothed side ended in disaster. But Bernadette didn't have time to come up with a strategy in case Leona didn't like Geralk. Leona sincerely believed that human hearts were stronger than all possible decrees of fate. That is why all of Reeby's hints about the book's plot were perceived negatively by Almaz. Only now did the heroine remember that this lady was always trying to change her cruel fate. She remained close to her friend in past lives until the very end, no matter how dangerous it was. Leona always refused to believe that Roberta could harm anyone, so the girl's moral principles were so strong that Bernadette was unable to resist her. On the outside, the girl seemed sweet and pleasant, but inside, she was as strong as steel. She reached out to Roberta like a little kitten, no matter how cruel she had been to her before. So when Almaz heard that Bernadette was worried about her, she felt incredible happiness. Reeby still found it hard to remember that she had once been a real villain. Roberta's true personality was not shy about using people as if they were her toys. So for a long time, she kept on a short leash everyone she liked even a little. But the current Bernadette was fundamentally different from that personality, and that is why she attracted people's attention. The heroine had something to worry about, because other aristocrats could turn Leona against her. Even Claire found it strange that her mistress had begun to worry about other people. It's all because those stately ladies had a strong influence on the plot, putting Leona in trouble. Many in the Empire were afraid to even say a word to these girls, who were distinguished by their treachery and malice. Therefore, for a long time they maintained their status, remaining the most arrogant in the city. The angelic flower in the form of Leona was ready to believe every good word from the outside. That's why Roberta tried to explain to the girl how important it was to listen only to her. But at that moment, the brainwashing was stopped by the Marquise and Marchioness Bernadette, who suddenly returned. These people were kind and sweet aristocrats who allowed their beloved daughter everything. As soon as the lady heard them talking about Cygnus, she started shouting at Leona even louder. Such terrible behavior frightened even the faithful servant, who had never seen her mistress's anger before. All because the heroine could not allow Almaz to find out about her connection with the Duke. After all, in that case, the chances of them getting closer would be close to zero, which Ruby could not allow. Only now did Roberta realize that too many people had seen her with Cygnus at the ball. Her carelessness resulted in Leona gradually hearing unpleasant rumors. But Bernadette's parents had no idea that their joy was completely inappropriate. In the end, Ruby had to lie to Almaz that nothing had happened between her and the Duke. If the heroine had told her friend the truth, she would never have looked at Geralt. Although the lady understood that everyone had seen her with the Duke at the ball, there was still a chance of escaping the rumors. While Roberta was trying to avoid rumors, her parents were already preparing to marry her off. The Marquis had long suspected that his daughter would soon have her first love interest. Moreover, he found out about this completely by accident, as he overheard a conversation among aristocrats. Then the men discussed with interest the fact that Roberta had been seen with Geralt in the backyard. This news caused such strong emotions in the Marquis that he lost control of himself. But the aristocrats had no plans to hide anything from the father of the girl who had gone into seclusion with the guy. This is how Marquis Bernadette learned that the Grand Duke himself had been chosen for his daughter. Naturally, the man was delighted with the status of the guy who showed so much attention to the lady. Previously, the girl seemed like a person who would never be interested in guys in her life. But fortunately for her parents, Roberta's fascination with dogs alone disappeared in adulthood. So they were delighted every time they thought of the Duke as their son-in-law. All these rumors did not pass by Geralt, who felt people's gazes on him. The guy had long been accustomed to ignoring aristocrats, but this time everything became much more complicated. It was hard for Cygnus to realize that news of his intimacy had spread so quickly. Even the skilled butler was unable to cope with the rumors that were spreading like wildfire. Therefore, the young gentleman had to put up with what the aristocrats said about him. But everything inside the guy was burning with rage and resentment, since he had done nothing wrong. He proved to himself until the very end that all the rumors were too far from the real truth. Otherwise, Geralt was ready to deal with anyone who considered him a cold person. Ori had no idea that it was only this part of the rumors that angered the Grand Duke so much. Meanwhile, the heroine had her own adventures that were not in the plot. But the girl sincerely enjoyed the time she spent with people she liked. Now, Roberta devoted part of her time to beautiful outfits, which she tried on again and again. Although Bernadette hid her past from Leona, she was still happy to communicate with the lady. In fact, she didn't care what dress to choose for the upcoming event. The only thing that was important to her was to get rid of the clothes that the Grand Duke had sent for some reason. When it was time for the fitting at Almaz, the girl was genuinely embarrassed by many things. Roberta did not interfere with the emotions of her friend, who was always distinguished by modest taste. She could see from the maids' faces that she had made the right decision in choosing outfits for Leona. So the heroine only had to wait for the moment when Almaz would accept her care. The blonde beauty's modest nature did not allow her to stand out at the upcoming banquet. But Bernadette was determined to do everything to make sure that Leona liked Geralt. She was not happy with the fact that Almaz refused to meet such an enviable and rich groom. But the Duke himself told the heroine that night that he was not interested in any other girl. The lady refused to believe that Cygnus was now only concerned with her personality. The situation became even more complicated when it turned out that Leona had already met the Duke before. It was back on that day of the banquet, when Roberta drank herself almost unconscious. It was then that Almaz accidentally ran into a guy who was famous for his coldness. She always had good manners, so she had no problem asking for forgiveness. But at that moment, Cygnus looked at her with such a terrifying gaze that the lady shuddered. So it seemed to the girl that all the rumors about the guy's cruelty and greed were true. So she no longer wanted to date a man who had so little warmth. Previously, the heroine had never thought that it would be so difficult for her to change her friend's decision. But their argument was suddenly interrupted by another unpleasant incident that happened to Leona in front of everyone. Almaz's face expressed complete humility, because something similar had happened more than once in recent days. But the fear of death was still too strong in the lady, who did not understand what was happening to her. Only Roberta still denied the possibility of a curse that could have been placed on the lady. However, Leona had long ago decided for herself that she was destined to die due to bad luck. Therefore, she ignored all the heroine's words, resigned to her defeat. While Bernadette believed that Geralt had a soft side to his personality that was hidden from everyone. After all, it was this guy who ended up listening to the drunken delirium of an aristocrat who wanted to communicate. At that moment, the Duke consoled Roberta, whose eyes were constantly filled with tears. But the guy could easily have passed by, since he seemed indifferent to everyone else. However, now the lady could not get the Duke out of her head, who had given her so much help in one night. But Leona didn't understand all the evidence that her friend so desperately presented to her. But in another situation, the heroine would never have tried to prove that the Duke was good. What surprised Almaz most was that at that moment, an unfamiliar voice came from the side. It turned out that one of the aristocrats was brazenly eavesdropping on a secret conversation between two friends. This girl's name was Layli Isley, and she had a bad temper, leading the gossips. It was this lady who spread the most rumors, some of which successfully confused Leona. So many ladies did not dare to say anything against such a famous and high-status lady. The heroine was well acquainted with Layli, because in one of her lives, she constantly rejected her. That's why Roberta wasn't happy about this meeting. Although everyone else was smiling, only Bernadette knew how terrible this girl really was inside. For this reason, the lady would prefer not to face such a strong and cunning rival. It was immediately clear from Isley that she could tell Leona a lot about the Duke's closeness with Ribby. This is precisely what Bernadette, who tried to protect her friend from gossip, was so afraid of. So the heroine had to lock herself in the same room with the nasty aristocrat Layli. In this place, not only the doors, but also the windows were closed, so there was not a single witness. Therefore, Roberta could behave dirty in an attempt to achieve victory over the treacherous Isley. The aristocrat clearly did not expect to find herself in such an unpleasant situation. At that moment, Bernadette's menacing appearance could have frightened anyone. She was a real madwoman, not far removed from her role as a true villain. Who would have thought that Isley would not be impressed by this acting? The girl personally saw Ribby in the Duke's arms, accepting his kisses. This is what gave her the right to push the girl who seemed crazy against the wall. So now it was Bernadette, who found herself in a position where she had to justify her actions. But Layli was much smarter than other people might have thought at first glance. So the girl did not believe that there was nothing more between Roberta and Geralk. This is all because there was clear evidence of intimacy with the guy left on the heroine's neck. So from that moment on, Isley was sure that Bernadette had become her rival. The heroine did not expect that she would lose the verbal altercation with Layli so quickly. She had no idea why the aristocrat was so persistent on this matter. This is because Isley had been having romantic feelings for the Duke for quite some time now. So she was deeply hurt by the painting she accidentally saw in the backyard of the estate. Then Roberta and Geralk exchanged such passionate kisses as if they were lovers. Even her friend was hurt by this incident, although she tried to treat everyone with disdain. Until the very end, Layli desperately tried to convince herself that she had understood everything wrong. Otherwise, it would have turned out that she had already lost the opportunity to win the guy she loved. Of course, the maids could not help but overhear the secret conversation between the two ladies in the room, so it immediately became clear to them that the subject of Ribby and Layli's dialogue was Leona. But the girl herself didn't even try to find out what exactly her friend was so desperately hiding from her. It was no secret to the girl that Bernadette had recently changed her behavior greatly. But Almaz was happy with everything, because in the end, Ribby became much kinder towards her. Isley was the first to flee the store, unable to bear the full truth about the Duke, so the heroine could only hope that the girl wouldn't tell anyone about anything. But her troubles did not end there, because at home she met Geralk again. It turned out that the guy missed the lady, about whom there was no news, so much that he visited her. But Roberta herself would prefer that this guy completely forget about her existence. Bernadette never imagined that Cygnus would dare to come straight to her home estate. But the girl tried so hard to dispel all the rumors about intimacy between them. In fact, the Duke wanted to come to Bernadette a few days ago, but Ori stopped him. All because the butler saw that the master was capable of trampling himself through carelessness. Everyone around him perceived Geralk as a cold person because of his charisma and status, so he had a lot of work to do to change people's opinions about his personality. The butler took it upon himself to explain this complex part, so that the Duke could cope with it. That is why Cygnus's clothes were also changed to create the impression of a good person. But Bernadette's parents only looked at the status of the guest who had recently come to visit them. The Marquise was delighted to realize that the Grand Duke himself had taken notice of her daughter. So even the appearance of Geralk in poor-looking clothes would not have embarrassed them in the least. The guy remembered all of Ori's advice well, so he started the conversation with abstract things. The parents were pleased to realize that the Duke was showing interest even in Roberta's past. But before, the girl was a real devil in the flesh, because she subjugated everyone around her. So her mom and dad had no idea how to describe their terrible daughter in a good light. In the end, the Marquise was able to extract from all the lady's strange doings that she liked dogs. The Duke didn't expect that Ribby was trying to find a man with a puppy-like cute appearance, but he didn't fit that description at all, which could have caused problems. For the first time in his life, Geralc regretted that his appearance only evoked fear and apprehension. The Marquise was surprised by these words, since she personally considered the guy handsome, and now he was sure that dogs would fit perfectly with this estate. Cygnus spoke many good words, for that was what his faithful butler had taught him. Although, in part, the Duke's interest in Roberta's childhood was indeed sincere and truthful, the Marquise immediately noticed that the guy was paying a lot of attention to their estate, so he was ready for questions. But he didn't expect that Geralc would be interested in plans for the development of the entire Bernadette family. An oppressive silence fell over the room, as such issues were not usually discussed with people. Meanwhile, Claire, whose task was to dress her mistress beautifully, was also in complete shock. Although the heroine didn't care about her appearance, she couldn't devalue her assistant's efforts. So the girl had to admit that she really did look very beautiful now. However, disturbing thoughts in Roberta's head constantly overshadowed all the fun in reality. She was bothered by the fact that the lady had accidentally deviated from the events in the original plot. And now Leona did not even look at the Duke, whom she should have loved with all her heart. The heroine planned to reject Geralc's offer after talking with her parents. But it turned out that the Marquise had completely caved in to the guest, forgetting that he was the host. So now it was Cygnus who played the leading role in this conversation about the future of the estate. This turn of events only hindered Bernadette, who had hoped for support from her family. Following Ori's advice, the Duke quickly secured the acceptance of the girl he liked by her parents, so Roberta had to take the boy with her to talk to him completely alone. The lady openly showed how much she did not like Geralc's presence in her house. The girl planned to refuse the Duke immediately, pretending that there was nothing between them. But Cygnus turned out to be more cunning, because he reminded the lady that these actions would break her parents' hearts. Until the very end, the heroine tried to force Geralc to meet Leona, as in the original story. She herself had no idea how much such proposals actually hurt her, and the Duke remembered this pain all too well, as he had seen it in the girl's eyes that night. This was the reason why the guy pursued Roberta so persistently. Of course, the Duke did not know the whole story of the lady who was suffering so much internally, but he was sure that behind her silence and worries, there was something more and more terrible. It was for this reason that Bernadette acted so lost when she was around people. All the Duke's words made the miss surprised, as they hit the very center of her worries. The girl had never encountered such great insight from other people before. Perhaps it was because Roberta had not been so close to Cygnus before. All this time, she just died silently on his orders, since no one investigated her guilt. But now, the guy suddenly turned to face the girl, instead of turning away again. His whole body expressed a sincere desire to help Lady Bernadette in her difficult situation. The Duke's confessions touched the heroine, who in fact lacked this warmth. But at the most inopportune moment, the parents burst into the room because they had questions. The Marquis completely forgot that the purpose of the visit for Geralc was to communicate with their daughter, and Roberta's confusion suggested that the guy's words had reached her very heart. Cygnus showed a lot of nobility in agreeing to wait until the lady spoke to him herself. Since there was no more opportunity to talk to the girl, the Duke got ready to leave. But at that moment, part of the sneeze reached the guy who didn't like getting his clothes and face dirty. It turned out that some guy with a dog came to the estate, and the Marquise was allergic to them. It was this man who became the reason why the owner of the estate suddenly became worse. His name was Adrian Watford, and as a child, he was little Roberta's best friend. Of course, a lot has changed over time, but the guy remained a favorite guest. But the heroine didn't remember this man at all, since she didn't know about her childhood. But as soon as she noticed that the guy looked like a puppy, the Duke immediately tensed up. Looking at Adrian, one really got the impression that he was sweet and fussy. In just a few seconds, the young man showered the Marquise with phrases of sympathy and regret about the dog. But as soon as he saw Roberta, the expression on his face instantly changed to a radiant one. Geralc would never allow Bernadette to be alone with this man. Jealousy flared up in him, so the guy changed his mind about going back right then and there. Only the girl's parents greeted the Duke's decision with indescribable delight, while the heroine herself understood that the circumstances around her were only becoming more complicated. So the whole company settled down on the terrace, since the weather was good for it. Only now did the lady learn that Adrian was a close friend of her brother, who was always on the move. However, Bernadette could not recall even one mention of Watford in the plot. Meanwhile, Geralc was showing all his coldness towards the other guy. But Adrian easily reflected all the unpleasant words of his opponent, since he often argued with people. Even the Marquise felt awkward in this situation, as he did not know whose side to take. Roberta watched what was happening from the sidelines, because she had no desire to interfere in the conversations. The jealousy inside Cygnus grew stronger, because Watford had more memories of the lady. The boy still kept in his heart that time in his childhood when he often visited this estate. Roberta grew up as an unruly child, so her room was always in disarray. The girl stubbornly behaved in such a way that she created a lot of problems, even for the most patient adults. At that time, Oliver Bernadette treated his little sister badly, unlike young Adrian. The Marquise's son was angered by the fact that the little girl was constantly ruining the beautiful garden of their estate, and all this was done in order to harm little Leona's sweet little dog. Young Roberta began to cry sadly every time, because no one could understand the meaning of her actions. Only Adrian always remained on the girl's side, as he saw that she just wanted to play. So Bernadette saw him as her best protector in the entire vast estate. Every time her brother started scolding her, the little girl would throw herself into Watford's arms, and Oliver had no choice but to leave his naughty little sister alone. Until now, Adrian remembered well how the lady had promised to marry him in his distant childhood. He had no idea that the current Roberta had nothing of the Marquise's former daughter, so the girl could not reciprocate the feelings of the guy whom she saw for the first time in her life. Bernadette preferred to remain discreetly silent, so as not to reveal her lack of childhood memories. Seeing Reeby's reaction, the Duke realized that he still had a chance to win her. No matter how much time Adrian had spent with the lady as a child, none of it mattered now. So Geralc boldly shared the heroine's words that she told him a couple of days ago. Even the parents did not believe that their daughter could say something like that to the Grand Duke. But Cygnus already felt like the winner in this situation, where the opponent knew more. With his confidence, he drove the heroine more and more into a corner, because she lied to him about her hobbies. But the boy didn't know this, so he was sure that the memories of childhood meant nothing. Adrian's cold gaze spoke louder than words, as he felt uncomfortable with the Duke's actions. Only Roberta prayed that the invisible struggle between the two boys would finally end. Unexpectedly, Ori came to the girl's aid, reminding the gentleman that it was time for him to go. The assistant had no idea how much he had saved Bernadette from further shame. Only without the Duke pressuring her could the lady breathe a sigh of relief. But the guy did not leave the lady just like that, because he wanted to strengthen his intentions towards her. Mrs. Parents were immediately delighted with the prospect of having a son-in-law in the future, and the Duke once again reminded Ribby that he was ready to help her in any situation. He wasn't joking when he said he wanted to free the girl from all the worries inside her, but deep down, the heroine still doubted that this man could save her. But right now, the lady had plenty of other problems to deal with. But Bernadette had already become completely confused about what she wanted from this 20th life. It so happened that after the Duke's departure, the tea party between old acquaintances continued. It lasted so long that it smoothly flowed into an evening dinner with the same group of people. And in the evening, the Marquise and Marchioness sent the two young people out for a walk together. And so the heroine remained next to a man whom she had not seen in her previous reincarnations. Because of this, Roberta had no idea what role the aristocrat played in the original plot. After a few questions, Miss learned that the guy didn't even really remember young Leona. This meant that throughout his childhood, he was on Bernadette's side, without thinking about the beautiful Almaz. The chance to find a true ally was too sweet for the lady to miss. Suddenly, Adrian became interested in what kind of relationship Ribby had with the Grand Duke. Bernadette herself was still looking for an answer to this question, since she no longer understood anything. The only thing she was sure of was that nothing Geralc said would make her turn away from her path. Now this guy seemed kind and caring, but the heroine remembered him from past lives. So there was a high probability that she would die again at the hands of the Grand Duke. As soon as Adrian heard that Geralt was just a friend, he became noticeably more inspired. Before, Roberta had no idea that her childhood friend could have feelings for her, but the expression on his face suggested that this man had hidden his emotions all his life. It turned out that Leona did not attract everyone with her beauty in childhood, when she charmed many, since Adrian was still on the side of the former villainess, whose body the heroine occupied. Meanwhile, Leona's bad luck continued to haunt her, so she couldn't sleep properly. This time, the circumstances affected her father, who was falsely accused of imperial treason. It was hard for the girl to watch her beloved man being forced to prove his honor. Almaz was finally convinced that she was the cause of all the problems around her. But when they met, Roberta continued to convince her friend that she believed in stupid prejudices. The heroine tried to do everything so that Leona no longer had to worry about the terrible future. So this morning turned out to be difficult for her, although the girl planned to get a good rest. But she couldn't ignore the fact that Leona had come to her for support early in the morning. It was hard for Almaz to be alone after the rumors hanging over her family. Her father was suspected of harboring fraudsters in one of the hotels, but his innocence was soon confirmed. Roberta had no idea that the scale of her friend's failures had grown to such a gigantic state. However, even after Leon's father was acquitted, things did not get any easier as gossip spread among the aristocrats. And in this situation, even Bernadette's influential family could not help her friends. Of course, Almaz was not happy with the fact that death seemed to be following her everywhere. The girl was insanely tired of constantly feeling the sticky touch of this horror. The feeling that her whole life was being shattered into pieces was very annoying to the young aristocrat. So she was able to find a solution for herself, as if someone had whispered it in her ear. Roberta visibly perked up when she heard that Leona had found a miraculous salvation for herself. Bernadette was ready to do anything to keep such an important character alive. It just turned out that Almaz suddenly believed in fortune-tellers who were involved in dark deeds. The heroine had heard that in times of despair, people are capable of believing in many things, but she didn't expect this. However, in the end, although the lady continued to argue, she went with Leona to that fortune-teller. Bernadette was so skeptical of these people because she had previously sought help from them herself. But all her friend's words did not reach Almaz, who was on the verge of death every hour. The girl was so tired of constantly being afraid of dying that she was ready to try any methods to solve the problem. Leona felt like she was going to go crazy if she didn't find at least some way out. The lady spoke sincerely, but was still surprised when Rebe suddenly took her side. This is all because the heroine saw herself in her friend, because she also went through the same emotions. This support was so important to Leone that she almost burst into tears at this point. This is all because before Roberta didn't care what would happen to the young aristocrat. As soon as they entered the room, Bernadette immediately recognized the fortune-teller who had met them. Horror gripped the girl as she realized that Leona had managed to find a worthy person. The heroine could not contain her emotions, as she did not expect to meet this old woman again. She remembered well how that lady had told her many strange things on the road. Leona's intuition told her that this fortune-teller would be able to find the answer, so she listened carefully. The girl was surprised when she heard that someone else had taken her fate not long ago. The heroine immediately understood what was being discussed, since she had accidentally attracted the Duke's unwanted attention. The old woman was sure that Roberta would not be able to cope with the enormous consequences of her decisions. Her words rang like thunder in Bernadette's ears, and she understood their full meaning perfectly well. The fortune-teller saw that something terrible would happen if the lady did not change her future. And it wasn't even about the death of the heroine, which had happened more than once throughout all this time. Leona was seriously alarmed by Rebe's seriousness, who for some reason believed the fortune-teller's words. In the end, it was Almaz who turned out to be more skeptical, so she began to bring the lady to her senses. Seeing their emotionality, the fortune-teller silently gave the girls special magic bracelets. The ladies didn't expect that they wouldn't even have to pay anything for the old woman's services and her gift. Before leaving, the fortune-teller again reminded Roberta that she should have acted more carefully. So the heroine was quite intimidated by just a couple of phrases from the old woman. Unexpectedly, Leona came to her friend's aid, ready to donate her money for her services. Almaz always hated injustice, and now she misunderstood the old woman's actions. The fortune teller did not explain anything more, because she had already said too many things. This is how Leona became a savior for the heroine, who was lost in this strange place, all because the girl didn't like the persistence of the wise old woman. While Roberta was still in doubt after this short conversation, the heroine was sure that the fortune teller knew more than she told her. But no matter how Leona tried to support her friend, now it was all absolutely useless. Bernadette had already formed a plan of action in her head that needed to be implemented as soon as possible. So the heroine spent a lot of energy preparing for the ball, which took place a few days later. As usual, Roberta behaved defiantly, thereby pushing away all the aristocrats around her. So even the most unknown representatives of high society did not dare to approach the young lady. But because of her outfit, Bernadette inevitably attracted attention from all sides. Some guys even became eager to chat with such a confident girl. Only Isley was not happy to meet Roberta, who attracted so much attention from people. That's why she immediately began to fawn over Leona, who could outshine everyone at this ball with her outfit. Almaz took all of Leyla''s kind words on faith, even though she had been warned by Ribi about her treachery. The atmosphere around the girl quickly became unfriendly due to the concentration of insincerity. But Leona herself was so happy that she could make friends that she didn't pay attention to anything else. Isley didn't expect to be met with such puppy-like devotion from just a few kind words. It didn't escape her notice that Leona was now wearing a bracelet on her arm that looked like Ribi's jewelry. Layli is used to remembering any details about people that might be useful to her in the future. However, even she was shocked by the attitude with which Leona wanted to befriend her. Of course, Almaz didn't plan to forget her old friend, whom she constantly ran after as a child. But now, Roberta behaved in such a way that no one dared to approach her again for a conversation. The heroine put her drunken failure at the last ball out of her head in order to have a peaceful time this time too. Bernadette tried her best to alienate as many people as possible at the event. She even specially wore a dress, the color of which caused more than just delight in many. It's all because a couple of days ago the girl had a rather strange idea about her outfit. She would like only Leona to shine at this event among the majority of aristocrats. After all, the Duke was supposed to fall in love with the girl at the very moment when she was adorned with petals. At that moment, according to the plot, Almaz froze in place, watching this beauty with joy in her eyes. And Geralk was just walking along the balcony, not far from her, which is why he paid attention to the girl. So the heroine placed a lot of emphasis on an important scene from the original novel, which changed a lot. But it turned out that, in contrast to Leona's beautiful blue dress, it wasn't only Ribi who wore yellow. Layli also shone in the sunny color, still hoping to attract at least a drop of the Duke's attention. Ideally, Bernadette would have never encountered this girl, who irritated her with her very appearance. The heroine's face clearly showed that it would be better not to approach her at all today. This is because, according to the plot, all of Isley's friends will start bullying Leona, led by her. Since she had such an opportunity, Roberta decided to deal with the annoying aristocrats. Layli clearly didn't expect that the influence of alcohol would make the Marquise's daughter become so relaxed. And the heroine herself confidently noted that today, her outfit was very similar to Lady Isley's dress. None of the aristocrats dared to argue that the girls' dresses were indeed similar to each other. Only Layli herself could not come to terms with such a disrespectful truth directed at her. But this time, the lead was on Roberta's side, who was not going to give the leading role to anyone else. The lady made sure that she attracted a lot of attention from people this time. After all, the more Layli gets angry, the more terrible she will seem to the aristocrats at this event. That's why Bernadette didn't hesitate to point out that she had already slept with the Duke one night. Although the lady did not want to reveal this truth, this was the only way she could anger her rival even more. So Roberta easily managed to prove that she knew better than anyone about Geralk's preferences. This is precisely why the heroine wore a yellow dress, because Cygnus hated all shades of this bright color. Bernadette was amused that Isley repeated what she had done, and ended up punishing herself with her actions. Revenge was sweet for the girl who had long wanted to somehow offend the arrogant Layli. This is how the heroine left the aristocrats with nothing, because the truth was completely on her side. All the girl's words hit Layli's self-esteem hard, as she had expected a different result. The lady was most offended by the fact that the other ladies began to loudly discuss her defeat. In fact, Isley, who often boasted about her skills, got on many people's nerves. It was at this very moment that the main action from the original plot began. Leon was showered with flower petals from head to toe, and the Grand Duke saw it all. It was hard not to notice the attractive girl, who stood in the very center of the room. But at that time, Geralk's head was occupied with completely different thoughts, and he quickly turned away. Who would have thought that a guy would only glance at such a beautiful girl for a moment? Although they met eyes, as was the case in the plot, Almaz also did not pay attention to the Duke. Instead, Leona enjoyed the petals that surrounded her on all sides for some time, and the heroine took advantage of the moment to hide from everyone and enjoy proud solitude. Roberta was sure that now Cygnus would definitely remain next to the beautiful Leona. According to her plan, the very next moment Almaz was supposed to appear in the park together with the Duke. And soon Leona really did appear, and genuine embarrassment was clearly visible on her face. But Bernadette couldn't find Geralk anywhere, who was supposed to be next to the girl. Imagine the girl's surprise when she heard a familiar voice behind her. But the Duke should not have been near the Marquise's daughter at that moment. It turned out that the guy had his own plans for that evening, as he wanted to talk to Roberta. He had no intention of following the plot and going after Leona, who did not attract him. Geralk had no idea that any conventions existed, so he chose with his heart. He actually met Almaz, who cheerfully waved her hands in his direction when their eyes met. But in fact, the girl paid attention to the man who was next to the Duke. Cygnus was quite happy with this option, since he did not want to meet the new lady. Therefore, the guy was sure that the beautiful blonde had already found herself a partner for the evening. And he turned out to be right, because Leona had been dreaming of meeting Adrian all this time. But the Duke did not expect that Roberta would react extremely strangely to this date between a boy and a girl. This is all because the heroine was worried about events that were further and further removing her from the plot. Before speaking to the lady again, Cygnus made inquiries about her past and childhood. The assistant did not find anything incomprehensible in the girl's story, even though she was behaving unnaturally. However, from time to time, relatives still noticed strange behavior in Roberta. However, Ori was never able to find any explanation for everything that was happening to Bernadette. The memory of the lady's sad face suggested to the Duke that she had secret problems, and these troubles were so personal that the butler found nothing about them. The only thing Ori was sure of was that the Duke was not Roberta's type. The assistant felt awkward sharing such information with the gentleman, but he was used to not hiding anything from him. But even knowing all this, Geralk still could not take his eyes off young Bernadette. He wanted this girl to finally focus all her attention only on him. After all, Cygnus did everything to help Roberta get rid of her sad thoughts. The whole problem was just that the girl was too focused on solving problems. She still didn't believe that the Duke's actions towards her were sincere. The guy couldn't even imagine what drove Bernadette to such reckless things. Everything would have been simpler if the heroine had accepted the Duke's care with a gentle smile. But the girl's heart was full of contempt, mistrust, and deception because of her past lives. So Geralku will have to put in a lot of effort before the lady can trust him. But all this didn't frighten the guy, who saw that Ribby also had sweet sides to his personality. On the contrary, the more difficulties arose on his path, the more Cygnus wanted to solve them. Right now, the Duke noticed that Bernadette had not worn the dress he had sent her. The whole point was that it did not fit the lady so well that she brutally tore the fabric to pieces. Therefore, the heroine had no intention of accepting anything from the Duke that could be called a gift. But Roberta had no idea that with her actions she was setting up the butler. It was Ori who had chosen Bernadette's dress, and now his competence was at risk. After all, the man was about to have a grandson, so he needed a job. Therefore, Roberta could not allow herself to become the culprit of the loss of many lives. In fact, Geralk was simply laughing at the lady, since he had no intention of firing the good Ori. But Bernadette took his threats seriously and blamed everything on her own stubbornness. In her excitement, the girl got tangled up in the hem of her long dress, which was sitting uncomfortably on her. But Cygnus was close enough to the girl to have time to grab her by the waist. The hearts of the boy and the girl began to beat almost in unison when they accidentally approached each other. At that moment, the heroine felt even more strongly that she was increasingly drawn to the Grand Duke. Her feelings were mutual, as Geralk's interest also gradually grew. Seeing Roberta's emotions, he was convinced that he was quite in keeping with her tastes. At that moment, Leona accidentally heard a noise from somewhere above, which caught her attention. The girl absent-mindedly followed the glass of wine that fell very close. But it so happened that this time, Alma suffered no damage due to the mishap. This made the girl genuinely delighted, because she no longer had to worry about her life. And right above her, a romantic situation was unfolding with Geralk and Roberta. The heroine clearly did not expect to fall into the trap of the tender embrace of the Grand Duke himself. The guy acted instinctively, so he slightly miscalculated the force, which is why they fell. In the end, Bernadette was the first to recover from her embarrassment, so she managed to move away from Geralk. The speed with which the lady ran away greatly surprised the Duke, who had not expected such a thing. The next morning, Leona sent her friend a letter describing her evening's adventures. So it became clearer to Roberta why the girl disappeared in the middle of the ball to meet with Adrian. Her plan yesterday to attract the Duke to Almaz failed miserably at the very beginning. And the reason for this was not only the willful behavior of Geralk, who did not communicate with Leona, but also the fact that the heroine personally liked the guy's appearance, even though he didn't look like a puppy. Therefore, Roberta was in doubt, because the wrong couples were forming around her. The maids saw all the worries of the young mistress, and therefore could not keep their mouths shut. They were worried about every little change in the behavior of the Marquise's daughter, who was always angry. It was these conversations that Oliver Bernadette accidentally overheard when he suddenly returned home. As usual, he took Adrian with him, and together they calmed the worried assistants. The guys were close to the girl, so she heard familiar voices. The lady had so many questions for Watford that she completely ignored her brother. The lady refused to believe that her childhood friend chose to spend time with Leona at the banquet. If Adrian had known that it would cause so many rumors, he would never have gone to that girl. Since the brother was not aware of what was happening, the friends moved away from him to talk. Only the maids were frightened by the mistress's behavior and did not look at the elder Bernadette. But the guy was not at all surprised, since Roberta always ignored him. Claire's care was enough for him, although his assistant remained faithful only to the Marquise's daughter. Oliver perceived his sister's adventures as an exciting adventure that began in childhood. Meanwhile, the heroine was racking her brains over how to turn the whole plot in a different direction. She never hesitated to use other people just to save her own miserable life. It was so difficult for the girl to concentrate on the plan, because all her thoughts revolved around the Duke. Never before had Roberta felt so insignificant and foolish in love. Adrian was an attentive person, so his girlfriend's love torments did not escape his notice. Although the guy couldn't help the lady in any way, he made an attempt to distract her from her thoughts. It was with the help of such candies that Roberta often consoled him in moments of sadness during his childhood. But the heroine didn't remember what all these gestures meant, even though she accepted the gift. The girl still didn't know how she should treat the cunning and handsome Watford. The guy seemed like a man who was ready to do anything for his grown-up childhood friend. But suddenly, he became interested in Leona, with whom he spent the entire evening instead of the banquet. But in reality, Adrian was simply indulging Almaz's desires, which is what he was trying to prove now. Bernadette remembered that Watford had always been on her side, so she trusted him. After all, she herself saw perfectly well how much Leona craved this communication with her friend. The sight of such a sweet girl brought a smile to Adrian's face. Although he was not charmed, the aristocrat had no idea how much he had forgotten from what happened in his childhood. Only now did memories of Leona gradually return to the boy who thought only of Ribby. But Almaz was one of those girls who was easy to remember when meeting. Of course, Adrian couldn't tell all the details of that sweet conversation with Leona, but the heroine still demanded every little thing from him because she was worried about her fate. It was difficult to tell from Watford's handsome face what thoughts were going through his head, so Roberta needed more time in the boy's presence to study him. The girl didn't have a date in mind when she asked Watford to spend some more time with her. Bernadette was driven solely by curiosity, since there was nothing about this man in the story. So the heroine considered herself obliged to find out as much as possible about her childhood friend. And Adrian did not resist this, since he himself would like to see changes in Ribert. So together they went for a walk in the city center, which looked very much like a date. Although the heroine resisted until the very end, this designation of an ordinary meeting of two friends. In fact, Watford hadn't expected anything from the conversation with Bernadette, since he hadn't suggested it. While the lady was trying to find the right moment to ask her friend about his communication with Leona, but Adrian was so delicate in his choice of words that he answered questions only in riddles. Therefore, Roberta could only find out that Leona left yesterday because she was cold in her dress. But this information didn't add anything other than more anxiety. Instead of talking about Almaz, Adrian paid a lot of attention to the Marquise's daughter. It became clear to the girl that with such manners, Watford must have charmed a lot of ladies. No matter how many questions the miss asked him, the guy still skillfully dodged the answers. Only after some time did he admit that he spent most of his time talking to Leona about Bernadette. And even when the guy returned to the banquet alone, gossip about Roberta reigned everywhere. The heroine could not have imagined that her disgusting dress would arouse so much interest among the aristocrats. The lady felt ashamed that even her close friends witnessed her being trashed by people. But the girl wore such a dress only so that the Duke would hate her appearance. However, even Adrian noticed that all his friends' efforts did not lead to the desired result. Who would have thought that, when thinking about Reeby's yellow dress, Adrian would draw his own conclusions? The guy thought that the Marquise's daughter had chosen this particular color for her outfit for a reason. But the heroine really had only one goal when she dressed up in such a dress. But another legend had already formed in Watford's head, and it was too late to convince him with words. The guy beamed at the thought that the lady had deliberately forced everyone to give up bright dresses. So for him, the girl became a fashion savior because of just one decision. The theories that Hadrian put forward pleased him, but they were far from the truth. The heroine could not have imagined that her reputation would change so much because of one decision. But from now on, Watford became even more interested in the girl he remembered from childhood. Many years ago, it was Roberta who always helped him in moments of sadness and sorrow. As soon as the girl appeared next to him, the world began to play with different colors for Adrian. No matter how much he cried, the lady didn't care, because she didn't think any worse of her friend because of it. So it was only when he was around the Marquise's daughter that young Watford was not shy about showing his emotions. It seemed that the little girl was capable of reacting to any news with the wisdom of an adult. The boy still remembered the moment when he found out that his parents were sending him to study abroad. For him personally, this marked the end of his childhood, because no one cared about the boy's opinion. But what could little Roberta do in such a situation when everything was decided for her friend? The lady was powerless to influence the adults, but she found a way to console the crying Adrian. The boy clearly didn't expect that he would be offered an ordinary children's candy as help, but the lady was sure that this taste of sweetness was able to protect against any problems in the future. For the upset Adrian, every word of support was important, no matter how stupid they were. But the past Roberta was confident that in the future she would marry Watford. The girl sincerely wanted this, since she did not see any boys around her who were better than her friend. But the heroine had no idea about this promise, because she was a completely different person. But, like the previous Reeby, the lady had love and compassion for all animals. That's why, when the girl saw a homeless puppy, she felt the urge to feed him some treats. Adrian had spent his entire life with dogs, so he knew very well what they could eat. So the memories of Reeby being so caring as a child merged with reality in his head, while Oliver refused to believe that his sister was interested in Watford. Although the guy didn't spend much time at home, he had his own opinion on everything. He was sure that the girl had long forgotten her friend as soon as he left the Empire for his studies. But even so, the maid was frightened by the number of guys who were now hanging around the mistress. Oliver had been away from home for so long that he knew little about the changed Roberta. The guy received bits of information from Claire, who had faithfully looked after the young lady all her life. So the maid knew that today Reeby would go to the performance with the Grand Duke. In fact, Claire also had difficulty communicating with the lady, so she turned to her friend for help. But that assistant served a completely different lady, so she was forced to remain in the estate. Grania Revel had an explosive temperament, so she rarely let her important servant go anywhere. She was so angry because she heard rumors about the relationship between Roberta and Geralc. The girl was most offended by the fact that it was her own father who said these words in front of people. Whatever Grania did, she could not gain approval from her relatives. Therefore, the lady increasingly took it out on the maid, who was not to blame for anything. But Rivel didn't care about justice, because she only wanted feelings from Geralc. Elrom felt sincerely sorry for the lady, but even with the predictions, she could not help her. But peacetime had finally come for Leona, who no longer suffered from troubles. But even in this state, Roberta tried to visit her friend in order to change the course of events. It's all because Almaz had recently announced her illness, so Bernadette went to see her. A couple of hours before this, the heroine received a bag of healing herbs from Adrian. The guy sincerely hoped that his gift would somehow ease young Leona's condition. The lady did not see anything suspicious in this action, because Watford was distinguished by his caring nature. But his request to give Almaz a letter irritated the heroine, who did not want them to get closer. However, she still fulfilled Watford's wishes in order to clear her conscience before her friend. But the heroine's curiosity overcame all possible boundaries, and she put pressure on the lady. The result was the girl's tears, although not for this reason, since Adrian refused to meet her. Roberta had no idea that Leona had taken a liking to her childhood friend. Watford's refusal had not been part of Bernadette's plans, although she was partly glad about it. So there remained hope that Almaz would still pay attention to the Grand Duke. But the blonde herself has already fallen head over heels in love with a completely different guy from her life. From childhood, the lady noted how kind and caring Adrian was to all people. So it was this man that the girl wanted to see next to her as a husband. True, in her youth, Leona never dared to confess her feelings, and the guy went abroad. But the memories of sweet Adrian warmed the soul of the aristocrat in love all this time. She wasn't even embarrassed by the fact that, even as a child, the boy paid more attention to Roberta. She attributed Watford's behavior to the fact that the Marquis's daughter required a lot of care. So the girl continued to believe that Adrian would soon notice her too. And indeed, the boy periodically turned to his second friend with a smile. Therefore, feelings did not fade within Leona, although Watford never showed reciprocity. The heroine did not remember the past, so she did not know that Almaz had communicated a lot with Adrian since childhood. Therefore, the lady did not have time to notice how her friend gave her heart to the wrong person. All of Leona's descriptions really did resemble love, although the heroine did not feel it. Roberta died so many times that she didn't care what kind of person she would love in life. The lady could only understand that in this reincarnation, the Duke was not to Almaz's taste, so she will never be charmed by a guy who is unlikely to show much care for her. It was for this reason that Leona eventually turned her attention to the gentle and kind Adrian. Therefore, the heroine had less and less chance that history would return to normal. After all, the girl herself gradually fell in love with the Duke, although she diligently pushed him away. But she couldn't admit to Leona exactly which person she had feelings for. This is how this meeting ended incomprehensibly. Since Almaz needed to rest, Roberta came to restore order, but ended up getting even more confused in life. She was not even consoled by the fact that her faithful maid had come for her mistress in advance for the sake of the performance. Only the assistant was horrified that they were already late for such an important play. The heroine was haunted by the thought that Leona's type had previously been completely different, but she was not able to change the person's preferences, which is what the plot required of her. Until the very beginning of the performance, Roberta was in confusion, as she still had not found a way out. But this did not stop her from immediately noticing the back of the head of the guy she did not want to see. Geralc looked as if he had been waiting for the girl all this time, specifically so he could watch the play together. But what most confused the lady was the Duke's appearance, which had changed greatly in recent days. The heroine was not ready to tolerate a person next to her who did not meet all the standards. So the first thing she did was start to tidy up the guy, completely forgetting about her thoughts. Otherwise, Leona would definitely not have looked at such a sloppy aristocrat. Bernadette never gave up hope until the very end that Almaz would change his mind. That's why the girl demanded that Cygnus finally get himself in order. But even in such a situation, Geralc managed to worry about the well-being of the Marquise's daughter. This is all because the lady involuntarily showed feminine traits, which left many delighted. Despite her embarrassment, the lady did not forget the main question for the Duke, because she did not expect to meet him. If we are to believe the guy, he initially wanted to see this play at a big theater. But when Geralc bought all the seats, he discovered that 2 seats were already reserved. This is all because Claire bought tickets several months in advance, so that the lady could attend the performance. In this situation, the heroine could no longer change anything, since it was too late. She had no idea that Cygnus only liked to visit libraries and theaters when there were no people around. But what surprised the girl most was that the guy for some reason needed information about the pregnancy. This news made Roberta jump away from the man who wanted to get closer to her. But everything was much simpler, because the aristocrat tried so hard for the sake of his assistant's wife. It was Ori who gave his wife a few more tickets, so that they could spend time together. Such an act could easily be called noble, because few people thought about their servants. But it turned out that the outwardly cold Jarok was kind inside and cared about his assistants. So the lady concluded that Cygnus was actually better than she had imagined. The heroine even began to regret that in her past lives, she had not tried to get to know the guy. Initially, she thought that he would only be good for those he showed interest in. After all, it was precisely curiosity about the wayward Roberta that began the Duke's infatuation. It turned out that all this time, the lady had been thinking incorrectly about Cygnus's personality because of his actions. The fact that the guy didn't save her from death in her past lives didn't make him a bad person. After all, according to the plot, the heroine had to die, no matter how hard she tried to save her life. As soon as the girl realized this, all her previous complaints against her friend were removed. Roberta realized how foolish she had been to try to dictate Geralt's image. From now on, Bernadette believed that Cygnus was as beautiful as he wanted to be. Although the guy did not understand the reasons for the girl's change in behavior, he remained grateful to her. He felt better because Roberta was no longer pressuring him with etiquette advice. In fact, the Duke dressed up like this to attract even more attention from Bernadette. But soon the long-awaited play began, and Cygnus did not have time to talk about anything with the girl. The play told the story of the unrequited love of an aristocrat who was rejected by her lover. As expected, everyone present was delighted with the production, which was produced by a good director. Claire was the most joyful, as she hadn't often been to such events. During the performance, Roberta unconsciously kept looking at the Grand Duke. She was surprised to discover that this guy knew how to be a kind and caring person. Such a guy would definitely appeal to the stubborn Leone, who always valued these qualities. During one of the heroine's reincarnations, the girl desperately tried to get her out of prison. But Roberta had already become desperate because her past lives had ended in failure. For some reason, Leona believed that Geralt would definitely save Ribby if she just asked. Then the plot went almost according to plan, and Almaz fell in love with the Duke with all her heart. But all this did not save Bernadette from yet another absurd and cruel death. And even sympathy from her friend was unable to bring her even a little relief. At that moment, the heroine could only feel envy towards the lady who was doing well. But this time, Geralt was on Bernadette's side, so she too had a chance at happiness. The lady experienced the entire performance as if she herself was experiencing all the emotions on stage. At the end of the play, the guy who rejected the girl finally paid attention to her. But the feelings inside that lady had long since faded, and she no longer looked in his direction. This story could teach a lot to people who are used to choosing only the best. Initially, that girl experienced a lot, before achieving high status and going out into society. In desperation, she met a man with whom she fell in love at first sight because of his kindness. However, the aristocrat did not reciprocate the lady's feelings, although he was ready to help in everything. So the girl decided not to rely on anyone anymore and did not accept his letter. At the end of the performance, the Duke thought that this story was too stupid and naive. He even regretted that he had bought out the entire theater, since it was unlikely that anyone would have come to the play. But the tears on Roberta's face told the guy that the ladies perceived this picture differently. Cygnus couldn't even imagine that he was the only one who wasn't delighted at the end of the performance. While all the few people present in the hall burst into applause, people took this story as an example of a progressive woman who never gave up. Even the heroine couldn't resist the performance, since she herself had always fought for her life. Therefore, the Duke's first impression turned out to be deceptive, which he accepted with dignity. Bernadette honestly admitted to her friend that the story had struck her to the depths of her soul. And it wasn't even about the characters' problems, but how they solved all the difficulties along the way. Only now did the lady realize that she was so much like the heroine of this play. The thought that it was she who the Duke had needed all this time warmed Roberta's heart. But the guy denied the film's genius until the very end, because he didn't like the male character. That man looked like a cute and carefree puppy who was constantly looking for an owner. But the heroine was not embarrassed by this staging of the play, because it showed her that not all the guys were honest. Appearances could sometimes be deceiving, and the cold-looking Geralk was a good example of that. After this performance, Roberta understood Leona's feelings that she was in love with Adrian. But before, the heroine forbade herself to show weakness even in front of her closest people. The girl's emotions only further confused the guy, who wanted to know as much as possible about her. Cygnus wanted to do everything possible to please the Marquis's daughter at least a little. He was even willing to change his style of clothing in order to appear outwardly a nicer person. But in fact, the lady already liked the Duke as he appeared before her the first time. The heroine had no idea that this guy could be much more compassionate than she thought. Only a kind person could attend a performance that was boring to him for the sake of other people. And this is exactly the kind of guy a girl would like to see next to her if she had the right to happiness. Therefore, Roberta hoped that the Duke would continue to act as his heart told him. Right now, Bernadette didn't care whether she could stay with Geralk in the future. She just wanted the Duke not to try to please anyone by being insincere with himself. The next morning, the heroine had to talk with her brother, but she didn't know what to tell him. Even the usually talkative Oliver sat silently in the presence of his sister, whom he did not recognize. Of course, the servants did not miss the fact that a slight awkwardness had arisen between the Marquise's children. In fact, the guy expected more activity from the girl, so he was surprised. Roberta usually didn't give anyone a break until all her wishes were finally fulfilled. But the maids liked the new version of their mistress better, who had become much wiser. Within a few months, the lady had changed beyond recognition and no longer quarreled with anyone over trifles. So Claire could safely let Bernadette go to another family if she wanted to get married. The maid couldn't get the idea out of her head that Ribby's communication with Geralk was gradually becoming closer. Claire was delighted that the lady began to pay attention to more than just the puppies. Therefore, there was a chance that Roberta would finally come to her senses and accept the Duke's offer. Meanwhile, Oliver was still bored in his sister's company because there was nothing interesting. But as soon as the lady announced that she needed a nice companion, the guy noticeably perked up. In her past life, the girl knew a handsome bard named Nathan Palamedes, and this time, the heroine also decided to take advantage of that stupid guy for her own interests. The girl did not expect that the maids would hear the master's entire conversation too well, so Claire became even more worried about Roberta, who couldn't decide on a man. Bernadette was so desperately looking for her old acquaintances because she was still worried. After so many stupid deaths, her soul and body were not in order, because it was hard to bear. So by this point, the girl was so tired of fear and loneliness that she decided to protect herself. The lady herself felt disgusted by the fact that she was drawn to everyone who showed even the slightest bit of warmth towards her. In this case, it was the Grand Duke, although it was he with whom Roberta least wanted to get close. Although the boy extended his hand to Bernadette with a gentle smile, she did not believe in his sincerity. The heroine remembered all too well how this man had given the order for her death many times in a row. That's why the lady needed Nathan, who had the ability to lift anyone's spirits. Of course, the brother knew firsthand about Palamedes, who often appeared in high society. Moreover, the aristocrat's family was close to Bernadette, as they were connected by business. So Oliver was only too happy to send an invitation to Nathan, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. Only the maids were dissatisfied with the appearance of another gentleman, but who would ask them? Claire was so horrified by the love triangle that was unfolding before her eyes. However, the maid had no right to leave her post, so she soon got down to business. The holy holiday was approaching. So many aristocrats were shopping for their loved ones. But Claire had another reason for looking for the sacred relic. Her friend, the fortune-teller Elrom, suggested that such a thing could save Roberta from misfortune. The maid was so frightened by her mistress's behavior that she was ready to make any sacrifice for her. Just a couple of months ago, Roberta's behavior changed dramatically after thinking about the end of the world. From that moment on, the girl behaved provocatively in society, not listening to the opinions of aristocrats. It seemed as if the Marquise's daughter was deliberately evoking emotions in everyone. But the assistant didn't believe that Bernadette could accidentally go crazy because of her worries. Only the best fortune-teller could have helped poor Claire, who was already in complete despair. Usually, Elrom only helped maids who wanted to change their fate for the better. So the girl has long since retired from business, since she got into a lot of trouble because of her skills. In the end, she was unable to save Lady Grania, whom she had served faithfully for many years, from madness. This incident helped Elram understand that people could change without outside help. She was familiar with the feelings that now overwhelmed the assistant, who only wanted the best for Roberta. So the fortune teller told Claire that Bernadette was now surrounded by three great men at once. And if the first was a fearless king, the second remained a devoted knight. And many people have already told unpleasant legends about the third one's frivolity. And Roberta personally invited all these people into her life, without thinking at all about the consequences. And right now, she was preparing to meet Nathan in the hope that he would cheer her up. This guy was affectionate with all the girls, because he really loved female attention. The heroine still remembered well many of the compliments that the guy said to her in her past life. Then the guy easily compared Reby to an angel, but he said the same words to many ladies. So soon Nathan, without a second thought, fell in love with Leona, who simply passed by him. So the heroine did not trust the traitor at all, who had abandoned a large number of girls. But for some reason, this time, Palamade seemed more sincere than in all the ladies' previous lives. The heroine didn't expect that the guy would immediately behave differently, something that would immediately catch her eye. This time, Nathan fervently swore to the girl that he would always be on her side, no matter what happened. But the lady had lived through so much that she had become accustomed to not trusting words alone. So the girl took all the guy's concerns extremely skeptically. Although he seemed sincere, Roberta was not prepared for the fact that from the very first words, Nathan would try to charm her with his usual methods. But this time, Palamade's eloquence failed him, as he was too embarrassed to say anything. The aristocrat himself was unable to understand why he was so worried, as if he were a small child. In the end, it was Bernadette who had to steer the conversation so that it didn't reach a dead end. Suddenly, the guy confessed to the girl that he had long been one of her most ardent admirers. This circumstance did not make the heroine happy, because it only added more problems to her. Nathan sincerely considered Roberta a celebrity, as he had heard a lot of gossip about her. Despite the fact that everyone considered the girl crazy, she continued to follow her business. What Nathan was most delighted about was that Roberta found time to help animals, but Bernadette was just trying to survive. But the people around her came up with so many things, so, in the end, Palamades was so impressed by the girl's personality that he wrote songs for her. Everything inside the guy was burning with the desire to demonstrate his skills to the Marquis's daughter as soon as possible. The girl didn't even have time to say anything before Nathan had already pulled out a tool he had brought with him from somewhere. The lady could not believe her eyes, because the aristocrat was very different from what she remembered about him. The heroine had the feeling that the guy was making every effort to please her. And although such behavior was usual for Palamades, he had not previously treated Roberta in this way. So the girl was left puzzled by the fact that this man had managed to change so much. Meanwhile, Claire was still communicating with Eller, who predicted that the lady would have 3 gentlemen for her. The maid had a hard time digesting this information, because before Bernadette had never even looked at one guy. At that moment, one man was quietly eavesdropping on the girls' conversation, but they didn't even notice. Much more important to the fortune teller was that Roberta's actions could soon lead to disaster. Only the fortune teller knew that this would not be the first terrible fall for the Marquise's daughter. The maid was sure that her friend was hiding some information, as this was typical of her nature. Elram herself was only interested in how sincere Claire's feelings for Roberta were. While they were talking, Lady Grania was looking everywhere for the maid who had asked her for a short leave. The aristocrat was used to Elram always being around, so she couldn't stand her absence. So Reveille gave the maid a furious look once she finally found her. The girl became so accustomed to the assistant that she was unable to solve problems on her own. She rushed into Elram's arms in panic, just to feel the pleasant warmth of her body. But the maid knew that all these emotions of the mistress were just jealousy and manipulation towards her. And Grania's gaze was indeed already darting around in search of the man with whom Elram was spending time. Emotions were running high inside the aristocrat, who did not want to share her beloved servant with anyone. So Claire unwittingly became a witness to such an unpleasant scene between the maid and the aristocrat. Rival was reluctant to calm down because she was too immersed in emotions. Only Elram's gentle whisper was able to influence the lady, who often lost her temper. During all the time she served this lady, the fortune teller managed to learn how to deal with her. Breathing techniques worked well on Grania, who was unable to come to her senses on her own. The maid had little time to give Claire any worthwhile advice, all because she couldn't leave Rivale in such a precarious and unstable state for long. Meanwhile, interesting events were happening to the girl who was selling apples on the street. She approached almost every passerby who was willing to listen to her about selling. But at one point, the girl came too close to the worker, and all the apples flew apart. The man was horrified that the baby could have suffered because of this situation. It was precisely such cases that Elram could call fateful, because they led to meetings. And in the case of that girl, everything worked out exactly that way, because she met an important person. The guy the lady bumped into instantly recognized the aristocrat who had grabbed the saleswoman. It so happened that at that very time, Gerald was walking down the street and found himself next to the girl. The Duke did not expect such a young child to work so hard on a holiday. After all, on this day, many put aside their business to pray to the great protectors. So it was no surprise that the remaining workers occasionally caused inconvenience. Even Cygnus became interested in the sacred relics that were given in honor of this holiday. One of the sales flyers caught the attention of an aristocrat who was looking for something specific. Although the aristocrat had a lot of money, his interest did not please the seller. The guy made a pathetic attempt to change the subject to the girl who was selling apples. But Geralk was not so easy to confuse. It was not for nothing that he was known as the strictest duke. So Cygnus did not back down until he heard the price of the jewelry that was advertised. Only the advice of the wise Ori was able to stop the duke from his accidental infatuation. The butler had no doubt that Roberta would never accept the sacred relic. The assistant himself was irritated by the fact that there were so many advertisements for decorations during the holiday. The butler's words made Gerald think about what was really important to the lady. What bothered him was that Miss felt he didn't know how to care for other people. Only now did Cygnus realize that he still hadn't known the girl's preferences. But Roberta never hid what she liked, but she always spoke in riddles. And it was important for the guy to hear that he could be real next to the Marquis's daughter. While the gentleman was lost in his thoughts, Ori was already in full swing dealing with the advertising representative. The boy did not want to collect his leaflets, which he dropped when he collided with the girl. He was sure that the relics could calm anxiety, which would help Roberta with her fears. Gerald remembered well the state of the aristocrat, who frowned constantly, even in her sleep. But until now, the guy was unsure whether it was worth giving the girl one of the relics. Ori's words came to his aid, shouting that it was impossible to give gifts without people's desire. So it turned out that Cygnus was simply trying to force the sacred ornament onto Bernadette. Although the butler did not address the master directly, his opinion was clear to everyone. The reason for the argument between two adults was a girl whom a young man accidentally bumped into. The little girl wasn't ready to listen to the quarrel, so she offered everyone to taste the delicious apples. She believed that good food could always bring comfort to anyone. And it really worked, because Ori suddenly changed his anger to mercy. Even the boy, who had previously diligently denied his guilt, instantly became calmer. It's all because the girl knew how to accurately guess the emotions of other people, which is why she sold so well. She easily found an approach even to the Duke, who seemed to everyone to be a terrible and cold person. Geralk was surprised to notice that this little girl had good trading skills. The lady herself knew about this, which is why she chose such an exciting part-time job for herself. The little girl studied the needs of potential buyers in advance, and then offered them food. In most cases, the lady managed to hit the target, so her sales went up. This is what happened this time too, as Cygnus did not refuse the offered apple. Although the guy's thoughts were still with Ribby, he didn't forget about business. Meanwhile, the girl was still unsuccessfully trying to get Nathan out the door. The lady was finally tired of the chatter of the guy, who was previously perceived differently. And Palamedes himself, even in the evening, did not want to part with the aristocrat he liked. Somehow, he managed to persuade the heroine to compare their palms one last time, just out of curiosity. Nathan was immediately delighted by the difference between his large hand and the lady's small hand. But Roberta herself was not impressed by this. Since she understood the guy less and less, she was no longer able to respond to Nathan's inexhaustible enthusiasm with even a weak smile. Just a few hours ago, the girl felt squeezed out like a lemon, and now everything was worse. Bernadette knew she was acting strangely, since it was she who had invited Palamedes to the meeting. But the aristocrat didn't know how to behave with a man who had changed so much. What surprised Roberta most was that the guy constantly tried to show concern for her. Nathan had a keen eye for the moments when the Marquise's daughter would take on a sad expression. Because of this, the guy himself became sad, as if he shared all the girl's feelings. Seeing Nathan's adoration, the heroine felt more and more disgusted with each passing second. Initially, the lady simply wanted to use this cheerful guy for her own purposes, but Palamedes behaved in such a way that the lady felt sorry for the bard, even though he had betrayed her in his past life. So at the end of the day, Roberta began to consider herself a cruel and wayward woman among people. The maid was surprised when her mistress suddenly began to introspect for the first time in her life. The heroine increasingly felt as if her entire destiny was gradually sliding into a deep, dark abyss. Claire felt panic every time she saw her beloved mistress in such a state. That's why the assistant attracted Roberta's attention, because she had a good book. You won't accept it. The girl learned about this story during a meeting with a fortune teller who recommended it. Elram was sure that Bernadette would be interested once she heard the name. After all, this book strongly reminded me of the plot in which the heroine was now living and could not escape. The fortune teller could not say much, since Gravia's patience was about to run out, but Claire couldn't understand why the fortune teller suddenly started talking about the book. The assistant remembered very well that Roberta had never picked up any books. Meanwhile, Rivel's eyes were becoming increasingly angry as time was running out. But Elram still managed to say that the book described all the misfortunes of a certain Leona. The fortune teller had no doubt that Bernadette would definitely be interested in this story, and she turned out to be right, because the heroine could not miss the chance to learn more about herself and history. The aristocrat did not expect that her maid would know anything about this world, so the girl accidentally lost her temper and started showing too much emotion. The assistant was completely at a loss under such pressure and was unable to utter a word. But Roberta still insisted on answers, since she was interested in everything about that book. If anyone had seen how much madness was in the lady's eyes at that moment, they would have called her crazy. But Claire had been through more difficult times, so she calmly led the lady to the place with the book. The heroine's heart continued to beat wildly due to the anxious anticipation of reading. Even the assistant was not sure that the lady was in her right mind, but she did not dare argue with her. The maid still had many questions, but there was no one to answer them. The main thing was that Roberta had never before in her life been interested in books. However, now the Marquise's daughter boldly entered the book abode to fulfill her goal. The owner of this shop was named Clem, and he was known for his taciturnity and difficult character, so the girl didn't know what to expect from such a terrible guide. The old man looked like he had been to prison at least several times for murder, and he communicated with people on principle only, with the help of signs, not wanting to pronounce words. That's why many clients turned away at the door, not wanting to tolerate such treatment. Claire was the first to realize that the seller was offering her mistress forbidden literature. The maid could not allow Roberta to get involved in something like this out of curiosity. But the lady was not one to stop halfway, because of people's concerns. That's why she didn't even think about listening even a little to the assistant who always helped her. Instead, Bernadette gave Claire some of her clothes as proof that she would return. For some reason, the heroine had no doubt that that strange old man could be trusted. At that moment, the maid could do nothing to stop the confident mistress, so the assistant could only hope that Bernadette would be okay. She still remembered Elram's words about how interference could harm the lady, but Roberta's eyes were so full of despair that Claire was unable to refuse her. All this led to the fact that the anxiety inside the assistant only increased, and there was no way out. Meanwhile, the heroine, together with the bookseller, descended deeper and deeper into the secret dungeon. As she descended, the girl became increasingly worried about what awaited her on this path. The scale of the secret library shocked Roberta to the core, as she had not expected it. Now, the lady had to independently search for the necessary literature on the lower level of the bookstore. Bernadette had no idea how difficult this lonely search would be for her. The situation was complicated by the fact that the lady was terrified of the dark, and here it was everywhere. The heroine desperately tried to pull herself together in order to find that very book among the many. Only a clear goal led the girl among the rows of books, each of which was full of secrets. And soon Roberta approached the very row where she could find the book she needed. What Bernadette didn't expect was that she would suddenly notice part of a face behind the books. This circumstance frightened the girl so much that she recoiled in horror. In such a position, even the most agile person in the world would not be able to maintain balance. That's how Bernadette fell down, even though she only came to a secret place to get the book she needed. It turned out that the unknown person was the Duke, who often came to the library to think. The guy's quick reaction was enough to catch the falling heroine. But this didn't make the situation any easier, because none of them expected to meet each other at that moment. But the Duke wouldn't want to tell anyone what he does in his free time. His feelings were completely shared by the heroine, who wanted to hide her presence in this place. On top of that, Roberta felt awkward, because she had scattered the books right in front of the guy. Finally, the Duke spoke first, and admitted that he often came to this place for relaxation. He liked the atmosphere of the secret library, which was always quiet and a little gloomy. Only now did the lady notice that over the past few days, the guy had begun to look more tired. But Geralc never told the girl about how much he had to endure. Bernadette was so deep in thought that she completely forgot that she had come looking for a book. But time was passing, and Roberta needed to find the necessary copy as quickly as possible. The girl couldn't even ask the guy for help, because she wasn't looking for just one specific story. The heroine hoped that several books at once would tell her which path to ultimately choose. Since the Duke was not busy with anything anyway, Roberta suggested that they read together. So suddenly, Bernadette found herself alone with Geralc, but she didn't care right now. Quite quickly, the girl became so immersed in the story that she completely forgot about the guy next to her. Although many of the names in the book were changed, the characters' stories were still recognizable. What pleased Roberta most was that she was able to find additions to the information she already knew. Therefore, the lady did not notice the passage of time, because now only the plot existed for her. And the Duke did not stop Bernadette from reading enthusiastically, although curiosity was tearing him apart from within. One of the books said that even now, Roberta occupied the place of the beautiful Leona. It was at Almaz that the Duke had to secretly look, in order to fall in love more and more. Another book told a little more about Geralc's childhood, which was spent in battle. No matter what opponent the adults chose for him, the boy always fought desperately for victory. His strict mentor was ready to come up with a cruel punishment in case of a stupid loss. That's why Cygnus literally snatched winnings from other children, thinking only about himself. It was the same with the son of Marquis Gilliam, who was always dissatisfied with his child, while Geralc's mother greeted all the difficult victories of her only son with a smile. Despite the difference in status, the woman did not dare to argue with Cygnus's mentor about anything. This is because it has always been difficult to gain this person's favor for training. However, the man gave good comments about Geralc, in whom he saw the future Duke. But he was irritated by the kindness of the boy, who was still too immature a child. His opponent's name was Rhett, and he was having a hard time accepting another defeat in battle. Their confrontation could have continued further, if not for one incident that changed everything. That day, both boys noticed a small chick that accidentally fell to the ground. They were instantly captivated by this amazing creature that combined beauty and cuteness. Then, Geralc was especially weak in front of everyone who seemed defenseless and small to him. So the chick quickly charmed the boy even more, because it had no intention of flying away from him. Even Rhett couldn't help but pay attention to the chick, although he remembered that Cygnus was his enemy. Since none of the boys could take the chick with them, they began to bring him food. From then on, Geralc kept a closer eye on the house cat, who might harm the bird. The animal clearly wanted to go to the secret place with its owner, but the boy did not allow it. He tried to keep the place where he raised the chick a secret until the very end. Only Rhett knew about their hiding place, and that's how the boys quickly became close to each other. They constantly ran away from home in order to discreetly feed the bird without witnesses. Gilliam was delighted to have a friend and a pet for the first time in his life. This baby grew quickly and became stronger, but still did not fly far from the people he liked. So they continued to fawn over the chick while enjoying each other's company. But this happiness was short-lived, since the mentor found out about the kid's secrets. The man couldn't allow two rivals to get close for such a stupid reason, so he soon intervened in their budding friendship to teach the boys a lesson. The mentor had long since stopped feeling sympathy and pity for the people who surrounded him, but Geralc was yet to experience the taste of betrayal from a close friend. It was Rhett who showed the man this place in order to get extra points in the fight, but the boy had no idea that his betrayal would turn into such a terrible mistake. From then on, there could no longer be any talk of friendship between the two opponents in battle. The mentor skillfully took advantage of this situation to teach young Geralc a harsh lesson. The man convinced the boy that anyone could betray him if they sensed their own benefit. Until now, the Duke had been tormented by doubts about whether he should trust the people around him. According to the plot, it was Leona who was supposed to be the one who would dispel all the fears of the great Cygnus. It just so happened that next to Geralk was not the caring Almaz at all. But the heroine didn't pay any attention to the guy's feelings, because she herself needed help. So the Duke was at a loss as to what he should do in such a situation. In fact, all of Cygnus's feelings were familiar to the girl from her previous reincarnations. More than once she found herself in a situation where she was betrayed by someone previously close to her. And each time, Geralk was the judge of her fate, and made decisions that were not at all in favor of Roberta. So, over many lifetimes, the heroine had almost come to terms with the fact that Cygnus could not be trusted. This guy, with a cold voice, announced to the lady that only a cruel execution awaited her. He constantly managed to find evidence of the girl's guilt, no matter what she told him. All because the Duke believed in his mentor's words that people are prone to betrayal. The teacher's cruel face was forever imprinted on the subconscious of the young boy who grew up. That's why Geralk always conducted interrogations, especially strictly, leaving no chance for a lie. Once the heroine realized this simple truth, she stopped begging for Cygnus's forgiveness. The girl thought with horror that the guy was capable of interrogating all her relatives. The last thing the lady wanted was to involve her relatives in her unpleasant affairs. Even though they weren't the closest to Roberta, she still cared about them. Therefore, each time the girl had to take all the blame on herself, although she was telling the truth. And Geralku had to accept the lady's confession in order to not conduct any further investigation. Only Leona sympathized with the girl and did not believe that she was guilty. Cygnus had to pretend he didn't feel anything because the investigation required it. But in fact, the guy also felt something was wrong, although he could not do anything about it. The teacher's stern instructions were mixed with feelings, and Geralk did not know what to choose. If the Duke were to find himself in the same unpleasant situation now, the emotions would repeat themselves again. The heroine had no idea that all this time, Geralk was overcome with a feeling of guilt after her death. It seemed to the girl that Cygnus remained an impartial person in any situation. So the lady was left puzzled after reading about the Duke's emotions in the book. Roberta realized that she was not the only one who had been hurt all this time because of the unfair accusation. The book she held in her hands was very similar in plot to the original story. Perhaps the characters' names have changed slightly, but all their personalities have remained the same. So, according to this story, Roberta still takes away her lover for Almaz. But in the book, Geralk still pays attention to the girl who is worthy of it. What surprised the lady most was that this time they added descriptions of the Duke's torment after her death. But all this time, the heroine believed that Cygnus did not even suffer from pangs of conscience because of her. After reading this, the girl involuntarily felt sympathy for this poor and anxious guy. Although he always longed so strongly for the light, he continued to find solace only in the darkness. Few people knew that Geralk's childhood and adult life had created an unbalanced person. Even now, due to the darkness around Ribert, she couldn't really see the expression on her friend's face. Curiosity was evident in the lady's eyes, as the Grand Duke's feelings became of interest to her. The guy attributed Bernadette's behavior to the fact that she also needed some kind of consolation. He still remembered well the advice of the girl with the apples on how to give gifts, but Geralk had nevertheless prepared something for Roberta in honor of the holiday that was currently taking place. The boy couldn't resist handing the Marquis's daughter this small box. It just turned out that the heroine sincerely hated everything connected with the holiday. She jumped up from her seat in a fit of emotion, not wanting to accept the gift that was included in the event. That's how Sishnus and his gift ended up out of work, even though he didn't even have time to show it to Miss. Many times the lady was accused on this very day, so the girl could not stand him. And Roberta gave in completely to the anger and fury that overwhelmed her because of the unfair accusations. Cygnus didn't have time to follow Bernadette, who rushed to the door with all her might. But walking in the dark was fraught with consequences, because the girl could easily fall. And this time, only Geralk's reaction saved Roberta from falling down again. But the lady was not ready to communicate with the guy who was always trying to save her from the darkness. The heroine had long ago decided that this time she would be responsible for saving her own life. But things went wrong from the very beginning, as Cygnus did not want to leave Bernadette alone. But this was not at all what Roberta wanted. although the guy's actions attracted her. A gentle smile shone on the Duke's face, visible even through the surrounding darkness. Cygnus honestly admitted to the lady that he felt as if she was seducing him with her actions, while the heroine forgot all about the man who was next to her. But a piece of the plot popped into her head, according to which she really was next to the guy. So for the first time in a long time, the girl tried to follow the predetermined path. This decision was not easy for Bernadette, who for a long time avoided any communication with the Duke. But now, Roberta needed Geralc to really think about her beauty and elegance. The emotions on the boy's face were too difficult to see because of the darkness that surrounded them, but the lady almost immediately felt his gentle hand on her cheek, which began to stroke it. It turned out that the Duke had been holding himself back for a long time, but he wanted intimacy with the Marquise's daughter, and now he merged with the girl in a long-awaited kiss, which he would not regret later. At that moment, the heroine wanted to feel at least a little bit truly alive. But at the most inconvenient time, they heard the library doors suddenly swing open. It turned out that the shop owner had gone downstairs because his customers were very late. Along with him appeared one of the aristocrats, who periodically checked this place, and right behind them came Claire, who had almost gone crazy while waiting for the mistress above. The whole company caught Geralc and Roberta in each other's arms, which was outrageous. Bernadette would give anything to avoid being in such a humiliating situation again. Now her maid considered her mistress a heartbreaker who couldn't make up her mind about guys. So the lady completely forgot about the Duke and didn't notice how she dropped the note about the book. Only one guy paid attention to this piece of paper that was so important to Bernadette. As soon as the girls ran away, the aristocrat tried to attract Cygnus's attention, but Geralc remained indifferent until he saw the title of the book on the sheet of paper. The next morning, the heroine received a letter from Leona, who tried to maintain communication with her. In it, the girl told how she went to the store to buy jewelry, but many things went wrong. Initially, Almas came to this place for a gift that she could give to Adrian with a confession, but the choice turned out to be so great that the girl was unable to decide right away. She was choosing the jewelry so carefully that she didn't immediately notice the Duke's presence in the store. But the guy was sent to Lyon according to the plot, although he hadn't really communicated with her before. And Almaz herself did not look in the Duke's direction, only because she already had an object of adoration. Therefore, Roberta only indirectly led Geralc away, since he was already drawn to her. However, due to the frequent meetings of the two lovers, the heroine hoped for a change in their feelings. But her actions interfered with the development of love between the cold Geralc and the soft Leona. But the girl was ready to sacrifice her feelings just to save this world. Even the assistant didn't notice how much pain the Marquise's daughter was actually in. The maid was only partially immersed in Roberta's life, which was becoming increasingly active. And this time, she brought Bernadette a pile of fan letters, the number of which was growing. The lady was most embarrassed by the actions of Nathan, who swore his love and adoration for her until his death. The more questions arose, the more the lady demanded that Claire meet with the fortune-teller. Only Elram could explain to the heroine the events that were very different from the past. But the assistant had no idea where that important fortune-teller was now. This girl had an incredible gift of secrecy, so she always came herself. Meanwhile, the heroine was increasingly faced with the fact that rumors were constantly being spread about her. But the girl let things slide, because she remembered that she could die at any moment anyway. Therefore, the aristocrats continued to cheerfully discuss Roberta's adventures behind her back. Only this time, these rumors reached people Bernadette didn't want to tell, and Adrian's face changed greatly when he heard that Ribi was next to the great Marquise. This whole story really ruined Leona's date, which she had been preparing for so long. But the girl had put a lot of hope into the fact that this time she would definitely be able to confess to the guy. All the maids around the lady kept telling her that she was more dazzling today than ever. Even the estate's assistants could not pass by the miss in silence and paid her a compliment. Everyone around knew the aristocrat's intentions, so they wished her luck. So Leona brought with her a small gift that she wanted to give along with the confession. The girl's chosen one was Adrian, who had no idea about his childhood friend's feelings. Of course, this whole meeting was very exciting for Almaz, which she had never admitted before. The lady kept reminding herself that she was truly beautiful today. She had been trying to meet the guy for so long that she had no right to make even one mistake. After all this time Watford, for various reasons, refused to meet the aristocrat. But even during her illness, the girl constantly thought only about the handsome and sweet Adrian. So, as soon as she received consent, the lady spent all the money on the decoration without hesitation. This gift was supposed to be a symbol of her love for the guy she had known since childhood. Of course, Leona told the maids, who always supported her, about her brilliant decision. The assistants were confused by the design of the jewelry, but they squeezed out compliments for the lady. It was just when Leona had gathered the courage to confess that she heard the rumors. Some people near the couple were loudly discussing Bernadette's impudent and terrible behavior. Almaz found it unpleasant to hear her friend being slandered right in the middle of the street. Adrian shared the girl's feelings, but he took all this terrible gossip much more calmly. Only Leona was sure that Roberta was not an evil demon from the depths of hell. She had the opportunity to communicate closely with the Grand Duke, so she considered him to be a strange person. This is exactly what the girl wrote about in a letter to her friend, which aroused the heroine's interest. Bernadette still hoped that the Duke's appearance would capture all of Leona's feelings. However, Almaz herself still tried only for the sake of Adrian, who she now liked. For this reason, the girl didn't even look at other guys, because Watford was the best for her. At that moment, the last thing the lady wanted in the world was to meet the man she was deathly afraid of. However, fate did not ask about the girl's wishes, and again brought her together with Geralc himself. The guy was also so engrossed in searching for the jewelry that he didn't pay attention to the aristocrat. Cygnus was too demanding of simple gifts, so he couldn't decide. Even the usually resourceful salespeople were unable to answer all of the strange customers' questions. Leona watched this whole situation silently from the side, as she did not want to communicate with the Duke. But the girl was surprised that the guy personally came to choose the jewelry and did not send a servant. So the lady felt a little sympathy for Geralc, who tried so hard for someone. Almaz was pleased to think that even such a cold man could have a lover. But at this moment, the rudeness on the part of the aristocrat suddenly reached its maximum. No one expected that the guy would suddenly refuse to thoroughly examine the rest of the jewelry. Instead, the Duke declared that he would buy every piece of jewelry that was in the store. After his words, a terrible commotion began in the store due to numerous sales. At one point, Leona almost lost her gift because it fell out of her hands. Unfortunately for the girl, it was the Duke who grabbed the box and did not want to give it back. They both froze due to the awkwardness of this situation that accidentally overtook them in the store. Eventually, Geralc spoke first and said that he needed this decoration too. The guy was ready to pay double the price for the thing that the aristocrat had already bought. But Leona had no intention of selling the gift for Adrian that she had been looking for so long. As soon as Cygnus heard that it was for his beloved, he carelessly raised the price of the product. But even this proposal did not satisfy Almaz, for whom this thing was now priceless. The Duke could not even imagine that for someone, the item would be many times more important than a lot of money. It was clear from the girl's eyes that she was not going to give in to this argument. In the end, Geralc had no choice but to return the purchased goods to the lady. Leona was dissatisfied with such strange behavior on the part of the Grand Duke. As they parted, the guy advised the lady to be prepared for the fact that she would return the item. These angry words further upset Leona, who was already worried about the failure. But what frightened the girl most was the scale of the Duke's purchase, who took all the goods in the store. She was even afraid to imagine how much of this would end up going to Roberta. Of course, Leona did not tell her friend all the details of the meeting with the Duke, so the heroine was left perplexed when she finished reading the strange letter. The girl was sure that Almaz had spoken to Geralc, but she did not report it. So Bernadette was left wondering what had happened in the store. But she would like to be as free as the little plane she launched into the air, while Leona wished she could be just a little bit as brave as the birds in the sky. The girl still found it difficult to bring the conversation to the question of why she had come at all. Unrevealed feelings weighed heavily on Almaz, but she continued to chatter about trifles. It was unclear from Adrian's face whether he was enjoying this conversation as much as the lady was. To see a smile on his face, Leona deliberately started talking about their childhood together. Roberta's house then became a refuge for many children whose parents were strict in their upbringing. This also affected Adrian, so he often ran away to visit under various good pretexts. Guests were always welcome in this house, despite the spoiled behavior of the Marquise's daughter, but everyone knew how to have fun with Roberta, who sometimes did strange things. However, Leona accepted the girl as she was and did not ask unnecessary questions. But there were situations when Almaz could not explain to herself the meaning of her young friend's actions. So, one day, Roberta decided to take home with her the bunny they had made out of mud. Leona tried to stop the girl until the very end, as she had planned the unthinkable. While they were arguing, the fake gradually fell apart, polluting the entire space. But even this did not stop the stubborn Ribby from wanting to take the toy with her. The older brother never took his sister's side, since she was already spoiled by her parents. Therefore, Oliver remained a formidable figure for Roberta and carefully took care of her upbringing. Even then, Leona looked with admiration at her friend, who always achieved what she wanted. And to this day, the more timid lady still retained pleasant feelings for Bernadette. Adrian also remembered a lot from his childhood, and also periodically admired the Marquise's daughter. The girl desperately tried to bring her story to the confession she had kept hidden for so long. But Watford suddenly returned to the topic of childhood, because he had something to say in response. Almaz had no idea that she would touch the guy to the quick when she started talking about this pleasant topic. The whole point was that Roberta often turned to her older brother's friend for help, and Adrian never refused the girl, always finding some original solution. This is what happened that time too, since it was the boy who came up with the idea of putting the bunny in the pot. Although Oliver did not understand such concern, peace and quiet returned to the house. Once Roberta's wish was fulfilled, she quickly began to behave well again. Once again, the little girl gratefully threw herself into the arms of her friend, who saved her toy. Then the lady had no doubt that only Adrian was capable of understanding her. And the boy liked this attention from Rebe, because he wanted to be close to her. Most of the time, Leona simply didn't notice that she was on the sidelines every time. And now the lady has lost the chance to confess her feelings, as the conversation has gone in a different direction. Adrian knew much more about why the Duke bought the entire jewelry store. The whole point was that the guy carefully searched for all the counterfeit sellers for the holiday. And, thanks to his operational work, many of them have already received their punishment for deception. No matter how much the criminals begged for mercy, Geralc remained cold to their prayers, because they had made a mistake. It was not for nothing that the Duke was called a merciless tyrant who was ready to punish any person. Although Hadrian was frightened by Cygnus's cruelty, his decency and seriousness inspired admiration. So Leona was not at the forefront of Watford's thoughts, who only wanted Roberta to be happy. Therefore, the guy decided to do everything possible to win the girl back to Geralca. Almaz didn't expect that it was her friend's existence that would make her heart break due to unhappy love. No matter how hard the girl tried to stop Adrian now, he ignored all her words. Watford didn't care about his childhood friend's feelings, because all his life he thought only about Bernadette. It was she who now occupied all his thoughts, and in order to help Roberta, the guy ran away as fast as he could. But the heroine didn't even suspect that she had accidentally taken a completely different guy away from Leona. Bernadette felt that the only thing she could take away from Almaz was the Duke's love, so the lady forgot about Adrian, while Watford was ready to do anything just to stay close to the Marquise's daughter. Since childhood, he had warm feelings for her, which have now grown into love. And only at this moment did Adrian realize that he could not imagine his life without this girl. He was lucky, and Bernadette was alone at the time, so she could talk to him. But his confession was not part of the heroine's plans, as she was counting on the love of another guy. At this time, Leona was left completely alone, and immediately plunged into sad thoughts about love. But the girl's loneliness did not last long, as a familiar lady suddenly joined her. True, at that moment, Almaz was not happy about the meeting, because she wanted to be alone with her thoughts. But Lady Easley had her own plans for the day, and she was going to chat with a beautiful aristocrat. At the same time, a personal conversation took place between Adrian and Roberta, although she was not ready for it. But the girl didn't have time to avoid meeting the guy, so she had to listen to his heavy thoughts. Watford was increasingly doubtful that there was nothing between Bernadette and Cygnus. The saddest thing was that the girl could no longer convince the guy of his suspicions. This is all because this time Adrian's attentiveness did not fail him, and he turned out to be right about everything. Although Bernadette did not want it, her relationship with Geralc was rapidly developing for the better. But the heroine sincerely tried to avoid this man who had killed her many times in the past. But everything came to the point that Roberta only began to encounter the Grand Duke more often. And recently, the feelings between the guy and the girl reached their peak, although they did not indicate a relationship. So now Bernadette was not ready to look at other guys, because for her, there was only the Duke. Adrian couldn't even imagine that after so many years of being by his side, he would end up being late with his declaration of love. But the Marquis's daughter seemed to him to be the one who would agree to marry her childhood friend at any moment. So the changes that befell the girl echoed with a dull pain in the heart of the enamored Watford. At this time, the old friends were so absorbed in conversation that they were unaware of the people around them. But the maid's curiosity was so great that she could not pass by this conversation. The surprising thing was that Oliver also joined Claire and constantly increased her excitement with jokes. So together they hid behind the plants, trying to catch every word of the two aristocrats. In general, the young gentleman would not have eavesdropped if Adrian had not surprised him with his behavior. For the first time, Bernadette was faced with the fact that Watford had come to meet not him, but his younger sister. At this time, Roberta was spending her leisure time in the garden, while she had no important matters to resolve. Upon seeing the girl, the guy wanted to run towards her as fast as he could, but was ultimately stopped by his astonished friend. Oliver had never noticed his childhood friend and his sister being so close to each other before. Hints of this had appeared before the guy's eyes more than once, but he ignored them each time. At that moment, Adrian also realized that his knowledge of Ribert was limited to his childhood. But none of this mattered to the guy, who was eager to talk with the Marquis's daughter. So Oliver had to come to terms with the fact that this time he was not the main one for Adrian. Therefore, the young gentleman could not help but overhear the conversation to which his friend was running. However, Roberta's words clearly upset the guy, which was evident from his dejected silhouette. The guy was very worried about the girl who accidentally fell in love with an unworthy guy. Many knew about the cruelty of Geralc, who judged all criminals especially harshly. His sternness could break any person, so there was no love in his heart. And Adrian was afraid that this is exactly what would eventually happen to the Marquis's innocent daughter. The heroine knew perfectly well all the nuances of communication with the Duke, at whose hand she had died more than once. So Watford refused to understand why the lady preferred suffering to good love. Bernadette would hardly have been able to explain to her friend that she was merely following her inevitable destiny. She herself was saddened by this inevitability, but the Duke's attraction fit into the plot. That's why she didn't even consider Adrian as a possible marriage partner. But suddenly, Roberta remembered that she needed to attract as many guys as possible. Only in this way would the girl fully correspond to the plot in which she takes away Leona's beloved. But at that very moment, a loud male scream interrupted the possible rapprochement between the boy and the girl. Only the sudden appearance of Nathan prevented Roberta from fulfilling his villainous duty. None of the friends expected that a third party would intervene in their conversation during the process. It was clear from Palomade's face that he was not going to back down, even though he had violated all the rules of decency. Even the maid didn't expect the guy to appear, although she knew about all the guests in the estate. Only Oliver remembered that this guy had threatened to come, but had not taken him seriously. The last thing the guy liked in the world was dealing with people who caused him problems. And this resulted in Bernadette's eldest son ignoring the threats of a potential guest. That is why Nathan's appearance was so unexpected for the lady that she was not warned. The girl had no idea what to talk about with the guy she had barely seen off last time. She still hoped that she would part with Palomade's early, as in her past lives. But so far, the bard's saving alienation had not occurred, and the miss was forced to talk to him. Roberta hated it when someone dared to come visit her unexpectedly like that. But all the girl's words fell silent as soon as she saw Nathan, who was ready to burst into tears. The guy clearly couldn't control himself if he allowed himself to show such emotions in front of other people. Although he constantly apologized, tears did not stop rolling down the young bard's face. Adrian immediately felt that the unknown aristocrat was simply trying to play on the girl's pity. It turned out that Palamedes had managed to do so much to promote the lady's personality. But the heroine herself was not delighted with his care, because she did not ask for such a thing. But the bard selflessly encouraged many people to paint pictures of Roberta's beauty and grace. He even intervened in some of them himself, since he remembered all of his beloved's lines well. Just like last time, Bernadette didn't appreciate the guy's efforts to do things she didn't need. As a result, Nathan had many complaints against Roberta, who had fallen in love with another guy. But he had just completed the main painting, conveying all the elegance of the Duke's daughter. Adrian could not stand this any longer, and he abruptly intervened in the conversation between the bard and the lady. Palamedes clearly didn't expect to be lifted off the ground after all the sincere words. Watford was furious that the bard had made a saint out of Roberta and was now laying claim to her. Adrian was so angry that now the girl had to console him, seeing the rage on her friend's face. Although Nathan was at a disadvantage, he still did not allow Roberta to be close to another. So he, with all possible mischief, pushed the lady away from Adrian, interfering with their embrace. These actions only caused even more surprise among the childhood friends who were faced with a stubborn person. Only now did Adrian realize that he actually looked like a guy he didn't know. After all, he too rushed to live with Roberta as soon as he heard rumors about her. Just one touch from Bernadette made Watford feel special, while Nathan was raising money for charity for the beautiful Bernadette. So Adrian's actions could be seen as selfish, because he did nothing for the lady. Even Oliver remembered well that only recently Adrian had promised to be more honest with his feelings. But in the end, it all came down to the fact that the guy was thinking only about himself all this time, and not about the girl. Claire was ready to intervene right now in a conversation that was uncomfortable for her mistress. But this was a quarrel that had to be resolved between the parties involved, and Nathan was not about to give in. This time, Watford had nothing to say in reply, for he had not thought as deeply as the bard. From the outside, Oliver could clearly see how pure Palamedes' feelings were. This is why Nathan interrogated Adrian so fiercely, because he did not believe in his sincerity. Watford had little evidence that he was not, in fact, emotionally confused. All this time, the heroine did not understand why her friends were arguing about such things at all. Personally, she didn't need a man who would be ready to love her until his death. But in this matter, no one thought to ask the opinion of the girl who became the subject of controversy, so the lady had to remain just an involuntary witness to the quarrel between the two friends. The conversation between Adrian and Nathan was suddenly interrupted by another person who appeared just as suddenly. Even the owners of the estate, who knew about all the guests, could not have predicted such a turn of events. All because the Duke himself came to the Marquise that evening to meet with Roberta. What surprised Oliver most was that Gerald was the first to talk about a marriage proposal. But Reeby's parents had long dreamed of marrying her off to a worthy and wealthy candidate. Even Adrian had nothing to say to Cygnus, since he was the first to propose to the lady. The most offensive thing about this situation was Nathan, who dreamed of getting recognition from the girl. But the guy had long ago decided for himself that he would support any decision of his beloved Roberta. Therefore, no matter how much pain he felt inside, Palamedes was ready to pray for the lady's happiness. In the end, only Oliver was satisfied with the sights he observed behind the bushes, and Bernadette had to bear the responsibility for the Duke proposing to her. The guy looked serious, so Roberta had no choice but to refuse. Moreover, her parents clearly hinted to the girl that she should not avoid Cygnus himself. Palamedes was one of the first to run away, unable to bear his broken heart, so Bernadette was only able to observe her sad friend, who was now sitting quietly. Adrian's face showed all his worries, but the boy obediently remained silent. The Marquise's son considered it unfair that such a good man should suffer because of love, but he was the only one who tried to console his friend, who had clearly succumbed to sad emotions. But at that moment, Adrian wasn't ready to force out even the semblance of a smile. The guy came to the estate today expecting a completely different result, but he lost. Even Oliver could not help his friend in any way now, although he had a little influence on his sister. But the girl seemed to have deliberately lit a fire in Watford's heart by approaching him. The Marquise's son could not understand why Roberta treated people so cruelly. After all, the heroine's heart had long been occupied by another man, but she was choosing between guys. However, as soon as Reeby saw the Duke, her whole body was eager to meet him, so Adrian was left entirely in Oliver's care, which could not leave his friend sad. While they were drinking themselves to death, Gerald retired with Roberta for an important conversation. Bernadette had a hard time accepting the fact that Cygnus ended up proposing to her. It turned out that the Duke did not even look in the direction of Leona, with whom he should be together. And Roberta herself was no better, since she had to follow the plot of the original work. Instead, she hesitated and couldn't get close to other guys for the sake of the story, all because the lady's heart was occupied by another man, to whom she was striving. The girl would never have thought before that she would be so happy to meet the Grand Duke. But now she could do nothing about the heart that was beginning to beat noisily next to Geralk. Somehow, magically, the guy quickly became close to the stubborn heroine. So from now on, the girl was unable to ignore and avoid the guy, as before. Therefore, now the lady's face revealed all the confusion in her thoughts and feelings towards the Duke. Cygnus immediately admitted that his proposal was sincere, if a little impulsive. Even during the day, he confessed to his assistant that he constantly thought only about the Marquis's beautiful daughter. In response, the butler confidently diagnosed the gentleman as being in love, which was true. Although, perhaps the whole point was that they came specifically to the exhibition in honor of Roberta. Nathan had arranged it in advance, so many of the guests supported his love interest. Therefore, Geralk constantly felt unpleasant glances at himself, but he silently endured it. The boy's curiosity about the paintings of Bernadette was much stronger than he could have imagined. Even Ori was impressed by the scale that Palamedes had managed to prepare. What Cygnus was most interested in was finding out how Roberta appeared in the eyes of other people. This is precisely why he came to the gallery. Although many people were not happy with his presence, but for the sake of such beautiful images with the girl, the Duke was ready to endure public opinion. Many idolized the aristocrat, who was not afraid to dress boldly in high society, so they especially tried to convey the confidence of the Marquis's daughter in the beautiful paintings of the exhibition. Geralk studied with surprise the portraits of Roberta, of which there were a great many in this place, while the assistant made sure that the gentleman did not lose his temper in society. And that could very well happen, as people grew increasingly angry over Geralk's comments. The Duke didn't like the fact that Bernadette looked like a lifeless character in the paintings, so Ori had to remind the gentleman that celebrities were often depicted in this way. No one ever took into account the wishes of the people, whom many worshipped according to their own desires. Therefore, the exhibition existed perfectly well, even without the presence of the Marquis's daughter. Only a few people left it quickly, but most stayed for a long time. The Duke turned out to be one of the second people, so soon the paintings seemed to begin to smile at him. This illusion reminded Geralk even more of how much he would like to see Roberta in person. Cygnus suddenly had the delusional feeling that all his encounters with the lady had been a dream. This is why the guy's desire to see the girl in person as soon as possible increased so much. And now the long-awaited face of Roberta appeared before Geralk, retaining a slight uneasiness. Meanwhile, the amount of alcohol the two guys drank gradually increased in bottles. But only Oliver was quickly defeated, as he did not know how to cope with alcohol, while Adrian remained almost conscious, although he would also like to get into the land of dreams. The maids were immediately horrified at the sight of the gentleman who behaved so carelessly. But Watford was in no mood to accept help from Bernadette's faithful servants. Instead, the boy wanted to be alone, to at least come to his senses a little. He didn't expect to find himself next to the Duke, who was now devouring the Marquis's daughter with his eyes. Geralk could barely restrain himself from wrapping the stubborn girl in a tender embrace. Until now, the heroine had reacted strangely and periodically distanced herself from the Grand Duke. But so much had happened between them that the lady should have gotten used to the guy a long time ago. But the memories of the plot did not give her any peace, because Miss was afraid to take Leona's place. She was no longer sure that she could continue to live peacefully with a deep sense of guilt. Meanwhile, Geralk's face remained just as captivating for the young aristocrat. Considering there wasn't much progress with Adrian, it was logical for the lady to switch to Cygnus. But her conscience did not allow the girl to act so unfairly towards the Duke. So Roberta honestly admitted that she needed time to think carefully. Until now, the understanding that she must fulfill her role has put too much pressure on the lady. Her words made Geralk feel as if the girl was constantly trying to become someone else. Before, the heroine had never even thought about the fact that because of all her thoughts, she had completely forgotten how to live normally. But the boy's words told Roberta that not everything was normal in her attempts to save herself. After all, instead of enjoying life, the lady tried to play a role in the plot. This is why not all of Bernadette's plans worked out, because she used the wrong approach. But the lady believed in the original plot so much that she did not notice the mistakes right before her eyes. So the girl couldn't find the answer to the question of whether she wanted to be a villain or a hero in this story. Seeing the confusion on Roberta's face, Geralk himself took decisive action. More than anything in the world, the heroine was afraid that she would be forgotten by all her loved ones. because then her world will fall apart, and it will be impossible to put it back together. Cygnus wanted to be near Bernadette, even though the lady did not know her desires. The devastation on the face of the Marquise's daughter told him that she did not want a sad end for herself, and the guy was ready to do everything to ensure that the girl remained happy with him. For a long time now, the heroine has only done what would be useful for the development of the original plot. But after talking with the Duke, she began to think about drawing attention to herself. The guy was a good chance for salvation, so being close to him was only to Roberta's advantage. But the fears inside Bernadette still did not allow her to relax and accept the situation. The lady was afraid that the Duke would eventually turn away from her, as had happened in past lives. But this time, Geralc's affection for Roberta was much stronger than ordinary love. So at that moment, he decided to show the girl everything his feelings were capable of. The lady didn't resist, as Cygnus firmly pressed her against the cool wall of the gate. Deep down, she wanted someone to finally take responsibility for her life. And so it happened that such a person became the Duke, who was used to ruling over other people. So the hot kiss that the guy reached for was inevitable in this situation. Cygnus watched Roberta's emotions closely, but he saw no rejection in her eyes. Although the girl easily resisted, her whole body burned with the desire for this intimacy. The guy came so close that he noticed that the lady had hurt her neck again due to constant worry. He remembered well how Bernadette had once done something similar to herself in front of him. It was for this reason that the heroine often wore a decoration around her neck to hide her wounds. But now there was no need for it, because the Duke wanted to see the real girl. He was ready to stay by Roberta's side and wait as long as she needed. Geralc would never tire of reminding the lady that she was an ordinary person in this story. Every word of the Duke sank into the soul of the heroine, who was tired of always being strong. So, albeit reluctantly, she succumbed to his consolation, finding salvation in this closeness. Roberta herself wanted to be close to Geralc, but stupid fears prevented her from achieving this. However, at that moment, Bernadette was no longer held back by anything, as she put her thoughts aside. The beginning of their whirlwind romance began at that moment, as they both confessed their feelings. The Duke acted decisively, because he saw that the girl had stopped resisting him, so he threw aside the bandage behind which Roberta was accustomed to hide her wounds. From now on, the guy was going to protect Bernadette with his body if she became ill. He believed that the girl was not a minor character who would die in the end. Although the Duke did not know all the details of this world, he felt like a living person. And it was this thought that he desperately tried to put into the head of Ribi, who clung to the plot. Despite all his coldness, at this moment, Geralc showed strong feelings for the lady. His face expressed genuine concern for the future that awaited Bernadette. That's why the heroine finally believed the guy who wanted to be there so much. His tender promises to take full responsibility for her life won the girl over, so she forgot all about the decoration that had kept her in order before. It so happened that the loss of this item of clothing did not pass without a trace for one person. A few hours later, the boy went out for a walk and immediately recognized the bandage of the Marquise's daughter. This circumstance caused even greater pain in the heart of the broken Adrian Watford. But more than one guy suffered at that moment because of unrequited love for the person he liked. After all, Leona experienced the same feelings and didn't know how to proceed in life. Almaz was always honest with Roberta, so she wrote her a letter saying that she couldn't see her. The reason for this was that it was Bernadette who became the culprit of the blonde's unsuccessful love. If the Marquis's daughter had not existed, Adrian would not have run away from Leona like a madman. This fact deeply hurt the girl, who had loved Roberta with all her heart since childhood. The situation was not improved by the fact that Almaz had to devote time to the annoying Lady Easley. That evening, the aristocrat was only glad to see tears appearing on Leona's face. The girl quickly picked up her friend so that she could unwind in the company of her friends. Before Almaz could say a word, she quickly found herself surrounded by other aristocrats. The girl had always been shy in communication, so she couldn't refuse that walk, although she felt as if she was being held tightly and led by strange hands. The next morning, the heroine was in a panic, and not even because of the letter from her close friend. The girl still could not believe that she had succumbed to the Duke's temptations. She tried her best to avoid this guy, but it wasn't enough. In the end, feelings overpowered all logic in Roberta's head, and she succumbed to her emotions. And in the morning, the maid had to watch as the young mistress went crazy in panic. This is because Bernadette didn't have time to react to all the unexpected variables in the plot, but she still hasn't learned to let go of all her thoughts and just go with the flow of events. While the maids of the estate had already spread the word that Roberta had been proposed to, and this news became the main gossip among curious aristocrats of high society as well. Therefore, many were eagerly awaiting the official announcement from the Grand Duke. Only at this moment did the heroine notice that among the many letters, one had also arrived from Leona. It turned out that at tea with Miss Isley, Alma's heard a lot of strange gossip. Layla has always been known for constantly discussing various rumors about other people. Only this time, her friends were constrained by the appearance of a new guest in their company. Contrary to all the girls' expectations, Leona did not support their unpleasant conversations in any way. Instead, Alma's devoted herself to actively eating away at her freshly broken heart. So the aristocrats felt awkward moving on to the main topic, for which they had invited the blonde. As soon as the girl started talking about Roberta, Leona immediately froze in place in surprise. While it was common for Isley's friends to discuss Bernadette's adventures, after all, recently it became known about another guy whom she easily attracted to herself. Since Reby was still Leona's friend, she found it unpleasant to hear about this. So Almas confidently stated that such words should not have been thrown around during meals. The girl was genuinely angered by such disrespect for her friend and the delicious desserts at the table. Only Layli supported the new guest's anger, as she partly shared her emotions. Besides, Isley was used to checking every rumor in order to cut out all the baseless and false ones. But Leona had no idea that the lady's support was not actually doing her any good. Until the very end, the lady did not want to reveal any of her friend's secrets that she was asked about. But it turned out that Isley knew much more about Almaz than the girl had expected. So the aristocrat knew well that her friends visited the old fortune-teller. But that old woman was a student of the famous fortune-teller Elrom, who was difficult to find. It was known to many that the maid was never wrong in her predictions about the future. So Layli herself would like to get advice from her, but she still couldn't find this girl. However, this opinion changed when Isley learned about her assistant's not-so-good traits. Someone spread a rumor that Elrom often collected money as payment for her fortune-telling, and the girl was helped in this by none other than the silent owner of the bookstore. So Roberta, who visited the library, could well have been involved in this dark matter. Even after hearing everything, Leona refused to believe that her friend was dangerous. However, the majority opinion in this room was against the insolent daughter of the Marquise. So they reminded Almaz that for a long time, Bernadette had not paid attention to her. And now I suddenly remembered my friend, who was always chasing after a previously evil girl. Previously, Roberta's behavior did not bother the blonde at all, who sincerely wanted to communicate. But she couldn't argue with the ladies that after the incident with the carriage, the girl had changed dramatically. It was around this same time that Bernadette successfully seduced her first male victim, and Layli blamed the advice from the insightful fortune-teller for Roberta's unexpected changes. All these guesses outraged the girl to the depths of her soul, even if they were far from the truth. This time, Leona couldn't come up with a single excuse to defend her beloved friend. The girl's mind was filled with horror from the fact that she did not know the whole truth about Roberta. It was precisely these feelings that Layli confidently pressed on the girl, taking advantage of her obvious confusion. In fact, Isley was torn apart inside with rage that Bernadette had taken the Duke. That is why she plunged Almaz into doubts, in order to take at least a little revenge on Roberta. The aristocrat was sure that the blonde would definitely break under such intense pressure. The fact that Leona had recently had her heart broken only made the whole situation worse. Therefore, Layla had every chance of achieving the desired victory over Roberta. Everything would have been like this if only Almaz hadn't had a smart head on her shoulders. As soon as the blonde rejected such a lucrative offer, no one around believed it. The aristocrats obeyed Layli in everything, so they became accustomed to the fact that others behaved the same way. It just turned out that Leona had misunderstood all of Lady Isley's insidious words. For some reason, the girl decided that the aristocrat was simply a fan of her childhood friend. This was the worst possible scenario for Layla. Once Almaz had decided on something, it was extremely difficult to convince her otherwise. The whole thing was that just recently, the girl saw a poster with an image of Roberta. This is how she discovered a large-scale exhibition with various admirers of Bernadette. The most ardent admirer of the Marquise's daughter remained the handsome bard who sang songs about her. Nathan was on duty at the exhibition day and night, just to attract the attention of the majority of people. Isley was deeply offended by Leona's comparison with those stupid fans, but Almaz had nothing wrong in counting the aristocrat among Reeby's admirers. Only Layla's closest friends knew how much she hated Bernadette, while Leona did not understand the meaning of the angry words spoken by the enraged girl. Of course, Almaz was a little embarrassed that Roberta did not invite her to her exhibition, but she couldn't even imagine that no one present had even looked into that place. Leona spent her entire life in high society, but she never learned to understand all the mockery. Therefore, as soon as the lady noticed the yellow element on Layli's clothes, she gave her a compliment. The girl sincerely called the brooch cute, unaware of how much anger this would cause the lady. Only the aristocrats around realized that Almaz would not remain in this place for long. Isley's entire face was distorted with anger, the dimensions of which instantly skyrocketed. It was all because Leona accidentally brought up the very topic that Layli was trying not to talk about. In fact, Almaz was not as stupid as she tried to appear to everyone around her for the sake of self-defense, so the girl knew that nothing could be done to her, no matter what she said. Only now did Isley realize that she had no dirt on this lady to begin with. So when Leona decided to leave them, Layli had nothing to stop her from confidently leaving. At that moment, Almaz understood why Roberta had asked her not to communicate with these aristocrats, but thoughts of unrequited love were much deeper than that of the lady, making her remember this advice. As a result, the girl decided to eat away her pain with delicious foods that she loved madly. Layli took her defeat hard, because she had not achieved her goals today. Before leaving, Almaz offended the girl by suggesting that she contact Ribby for news about the Duke. These words fell like a stone on the soul of Isley, who had been suffering for a long time from unrequited love for a guy. As soon as Leona left the room, Layli burst into loud curses at her. But none of this was able to spoil the mood of the lady who was eating delicious desserts. Although the girl frightened the maids with her cheerful behavior, she didn't care about it. At that moment, the future no longer seemed so dark and terrible for the young girl, while Layli could barely restrain herself from destroying the entire room along with the furniture. Who would have thought that sweet Leona would be able to anger a person so much? The aristocrats had no idea how to calm down the terribly angry Isley. They realized too late that it was not only Roberta who posed a danger to their society. The timid Leona was not much different from her friend, since she also knew how not to let anyone offend her. Almaz innocently told her friend about all this in a letter, which she sent that morning. The heroine did not expect that such a strong sense of justice would suddenly awaken in the aristocrat. But the girl's desire to help didn't make things better, as she added problems to Roberta's problems. But Leona's efforts were not in vain, because the lady was able to learn something from her letter. Bernadette was sure that Layli hadn't just connected Elrum with the bookstore for no reason. Although Almaz did not put these facts together, Roberta knew much more than her young friend. Therefore, from now on, the girl was going to get a meeting with the fortune-teller who preferred books. But at the most inopportune moment, one of the maids announced that the lady had a guest. It was not difficult for Bernadette to guess what kind of person had visited her so unexpectedly. It was foolish to expect Gerald to leave the girl alone after everything they had been through. This is because his feelings were much deeper than they might seem at first glance. Moreover, Roberta's parents welcomed Cygnus with joyful smiles at any moment. It was all because they wanted to attract the Duke's finances to their business. That's why they were so kind. The girl immediately realized that the Marquise and Marchioness were dishonest when they invited Gerald. But this didn't matter to the guy, since it was more important for him to be next to the lady. Otherwise, Cygnus would not have been able to walk with Roberta until dawn, indulging in his desires. The Duke could not have imagined that his words would embarrass the girl so much after everything. Bernadette constantly hid her face, unable to look him straight in the eyes even once. Memories of the stormy night constantly made the heroine blush from head to toe, and the guy's promises still seemed pleasant and heartwarming to the lost lady, so she couldn't get the idea out of her head that she was a living person in this world. Gerald saw how deeply his advice had penetrated the mind of the Marquise's young daughter, and he was ready to use this to attract even more attention from the girl. The guy remained so serious that he was going to make her an official proposal, and nothing could make the Duke change his mind and look at another lady. The tender kiss with which he accompanied his words also spoke volumes to Roberta. As usual, Cygnus left her puzzled after he told her of his desires. But Bernadette still hadn't fully decided whether she wanted to link her fate with this man. And the parents did not make the girl's choice any easier, since they already considered the Duke their son-in-law. They fell in love with him not only for his appearance, but also for his promises to help with financial matters. But Roberta couldn't be so sure that she would agree to Giralc's proposal, while her parents were already delighted with the guy who helped them with investments. So the Marquis had already mentally approved of his daughter's marriage, although the engagement had not even taken place. Only now did the heroine realize that there was little she could have done to change this exciting situation. But the lady did not agree to follow the Duke's lead, as he had been suggesting to her all this time. The girl needed time to finally resolve all the issues in her head, so Roberta ran away to the only place that could give her any answers. She genuinely couldn't find an answer to the question of what was going on with the original plot, and only a fortune teller associated with the bookstore was able to give the lady a clue. But at that moment, fate had another meeting in store for Bernadette, one for which she was not prepared. Roberta remembered very well that this girl could not be trusted, because she could disrupt her plans. It turned out that all this time, Layli had been waiting for the Marquis's daughter right in the bookstore. The store owner did not react in any way to the guest who did not buy a single book from him. Since Isley couldn't help her in any way, the heroine brazenly ignored this lady. Roberta's behavior only caused more anger inside the girl, who wanted revenge. While Bernadette tried to get an answer from the store owner, Layli was thinking about her plan. She needed to do something that would attract the attention of the Marquise's impudent daughter. So Isley lied that she knew perfectly well where the fortune teller Elrom could be found. The lady even promised that she would lead Ribby to that girl if she followed her. If the heroine had known how long she would have to go to achieve this, she would have definitely turned to someone else. But Layli continued to walk forward boldly, although her clothes were not suitable for forest roads. Until now, whenever Bernadette hesitated, Isley would remind her about her meeting with the fortune teller. This raised more and more questions for the heroine, because the end of their path was still nowhere in sight. Besides, she didn't see any reason why this lady would help her. So Roberta quickly came to the conclusion that Isley didn't actually know where they were going. The suspicions of the Marquis's daughter once again struck at the shaky ego of young Layli. The girl was upset to realize that Bernadette did not trust her in such matters. In fact, she could hardly contain her rage at the thought that the Duke had not proposed to her. Isley remained the go-to person for all the gossip in high society, so she already knew that Marquise Bernadette had received financial assistance from Geralt himself. Roberta had nothing to say in defense of her parents, who had found a gold mine for themselves in the form of Cygnus. They always tried to get their business off the ground at the expense of other people who helped them. And this circumstance angered Layla even more, whose parents did everything themselves. The girl knew so well about their affairs, since she was going to take on all parental responsibilities. As she spoke, the two rivals were gradually surrounded by people invited specifically by Isley. It was not without reason that Layli started talking about her father and mother's business, which involved transporting barrels. After all, these barrels were so well sealed that no one would have known what was inside. Isley planned to trap her rival in one of these barrels to get rid of her, and the bandits she paid were supposed to help the girl in this terrible goal. The heroine would never have been able to guess that she had in fact simply fallen for a trick. It was only when a rag containing a sleeping pill was applied to her face that Roberta realized her situation. These men didn't care what kind of work they did, as long as they were paid regularly, so they were willing to put Bernadette's life in danger for their own selfish purposes. The whole world gradually began to blur before the heroine's eyes, and she did not hear part of Layli's words. While Isley openly mocked Roberta, whom she was about to place in a barrel, the girl was sure that Bernadette would never escape from such terrible captivity. While it was nothing for Layli to ask to throw one of the barrels into the sea, this was precisely the goal the aristocrat had been pursuing from the very beginning, wanting to get rid of Roberta. And the face of the Marquis's daughter was beautiful at that moment, as it revealed all her fear. Layli already felt the taste of victory on her lips, because she could try to seduce the free duke. But she didn't expect that, even in such a state, Roberta would offer her worthy resistance. The heroine had no intention of meekly moving towards her death if it could be avoided. Even the assistants didn't think that the sleepy girl would be so nimble and strong. Rage mixed with madness, and was reflected on the heroine's face, which did not accept such an end. So the girl began to desperately resist, just to avoid falling into the barrel. Seeing such emotions on Bernadette's face, the assistants did not dare to grab her again, all because death in a barrel would have been one of the slowest for the poor daughter of the Marquise. That is why the lady denied such an end as long as there was at least one possibility. Even the hands of the servants, who tried with all their might to restrain the unruly girl, did not stop her. At this point, Roberta became so angry because she did not want to die a stupid death again. If Layli had known in advance about her rival's madness, she would never have come close to her,